Elon Musk stood in front of a crowd, his hands casually adjusting the cuffs of his signature black shirt. The usual coolness and confidence he exuded were slightly overshadowed by the glint of curiosity in his eyes. The room was packed with tech enthusiasts, investors, and journalists, all waiting for the man behind Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink to reveal his next big move. But there was something different in the air today. This wasn't a typical press conference or product launch. Today, we're doing something a little unconventional, Elon began, his voice calm but carrying an edge of excitement. I've been given an opportunity to face off against a few of the brightest minds I've ever encountered. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He paused, letting the words sink in. The crowd hushed. If anyone could handle a challenge, it was Elon Musk. Yet, the next sentence would leave everyone stunned. These minds? They're not adults. They're children. Young prodigies, each under the age of 15. Murmurs rippled through the room, some in disbelief, others in anticipation. Elon Musk, a billionaire and visionary, was about to compete against children, who were hailed as geniuses in fields like artificial intelligence, physics, and engineering. How could that possibly end? Elon gave a small smile, his eyes twinkling with mischief. I'm excited to see what these kids can do. I'm not worried, but I think you all might be in for a surprise. A projection screen behind him flickered to life, displaying the faces of the three prodigies. There was Mia, a 12-year-old girl from Silicon Valley with an impressive resume in AI development. Next, Alex, a 14-year-old boy from London, whose research into quantum mechanics had already been published in several respected journals. Finally, there was Kai, a 10-year-old coding savant from Seoul, who had created his own operating system by the age of 8. As their faces appeared on the screen, the room seemed to hold its breath. Who were these children? How could they possibly compete with Elon Musk, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation and technological advancement? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Elon joked, breaking the tension. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was a light-hearted way to begin what was about to become one of the most intense and surprising challenges of his career. The room buzzed with excitement, but there was a palpable tension hanging in the air. This wasn't just about technology. It was about something deeper. The collision of generations, the clash between established genius and raw, untapped potential. Could Elon Musk, the symbol of technological supremacy, hold his ground against children whose imaginations knew no bounds? Musk had always been known for his ability to think years, sometimes decades, ahead of the rest of the world. But today, in this arena, it wasn't about outsmarting competitors. It was about keeping up with them. And so, the challenge began. In a remote, high-tech laboratory, the stage was set. A group of experts, engineers, and technicians surrounded the participants. In front of each of them was a blank slate, an empty virtual world on a computer screen, just waiting to be molded into something revolutionary. The task was simple, yet profoundly complex. Design a machine capable of solving one of humanity's greatest challenges: clean, sustainable energy production. The rules were straightforward. Each team had 24 hours to design, program, and present their solution. The catch? They would not only be competing against each other, but also against the clock, and the rest of the world was watching. Elon took his seat at one of the workstations, adjusting his glasses, and cracked his knuckles. Despite the light-hearted nature of the press conference, he was deadly serious about this competition. The stakes were high, not just for him, but for the future of technology. Across the table, Mia, Alex, and Kai were already deep into their work. Elon couldn't help but admire their confidence and drive. Mia was furiously typing code into her laptop, her fingers moving faster than most adults could keep up with. Alex, ever the physicist, had already begun scribbling complex formulas on a whiteboard, seemingly unfazed by the challenge. And Kai? He was already assembling pieces of his own custom-built hardware. No instructions, no directions, just pure ingenuity. But as the clock started ticking down, the real test began. Would Elon be able to keep up with these young prodigies, or would he find himself left in the dust? The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Elon found himself drawn into the rhythm of the competition, trying to come up with something that could rival the brilliant minds around him. But he was facing an unexpected problem. These children weren't just good, they were innovative in ways he hadn't anticipated. By the 6th hour, Elon was stuck. His initial design, based on the principles of solar energy and battery storage, was running into technical glitches. He didn't panic, though. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He could do this. He had to. Across the room, Mia had already implemented a machine learning algorithm that allowed her design to adapt and optimize itself in real time. Alex was building a theoretical quantum computer to simulate energy flow and improve efficiency. And Kai? He had already created a functioning prototype, an energy generator powered by motion, using parts from old appliances and computer hardware. Elon couldn't help but smile. These kids were truly something else. "Don't get too comfortable," he muttered to himself, getting back to his work. This is far from over. As the night wore on, the tension continued to mount. The final hour was approaching, and Elon knew this was it. He had to push harder, faster, and smarter than he ever had before. The final presentations were looming, and the entire world would be watching. Would his years of experience and billions in resources be enough to outsmart children who hadn't yet hit their teenage years? Or was this about to be the biggest upset of his life? Only time would tell. Elon Musk had always been driven by a singular obsession: to push humanity forward. His career was built on a desire to revolutionize industries, whether that was through electric cars, rockets that could land back on Earth, or the brain-computer interface of Neuralink. In the public eye, he was a figure of immense genius, a modern-day Tony Stark, admired and sometimes envied for his extraordinary vision and ability to make the impossible seem possible. But that wasn't the whole story. Behind his confident exterior, there was another side to Elon. The side that had once been a scared young boy, uncertain of his place in the world. Growing up in Pretoria, South Africa, he had been a bookish, awkward kid with a deep curiosity about how things worked. At the age of 10, he taught himself to code by reading programming books and writing simple video games. By 12, he sold a game he had created called Blaster for a few $100s. It wasn't much, but it was a taste of success. And that taste fueled his relentless pursuit of bigger dreams. His childhood wasn't without its challenges, though. His parents, particularly his father, weren't exactly the warmest or most supportive figures in his life. Elon had always felt like an outsider, whether at home or at school. It was the books and the science fiction novels that became his escape. The idea that he could one day travel to space, change the world with electric cars, or colonize Mars was what kept him going through the lonely moments. His mother, on the other hand, was a constant source of encouragement. She had been a model for resilience, running her own business while raising him and his siblings. It was her influence that kept him grounded, reminding him that no matter how far he reached, he needed to stay true to his ideals. "Elon," she used to tell him, "the world will tell you that you can't do things. But if you really want to make a difference, you have to be willing to face rejection. You can't let it stop you." These words had stayed with him, even as he built his empire. Every failure, every rejection, had been a stepping stone. He'd failed many times, first with Zip2, then with X.com, which became PayPal, but each time, he learned, adapted, and kept moving forward. The risks had been enormous, but so were the rewards. Now, decades later, Elon had reached a place where his name was synonymous with success. But today, he was facing something different, a challenge unlike any he had ever encountered. For once, his years of experience and vast resources might not be enough to carry him through. The competition was no longer other billionaires or the corporate elite. It was children, kids who hadn't yet celebrated their 15th birthdays, but who were already shaking up the world in ways that even seasoned engineers and scientists could only dream of. Mia, the 12-year-old AI prodigy, was one of the brightest minds in Silicon Valley. She had created her own neural networks at the age of 8 and was now leading projects that had attracted the attention of major tech companies. Her latest project involved developing an AI that could autonomously redesign itself to improve efficiency, essentially creating an AI that could evolve without human intervention. It was a bold idea, and one that had already begun to change the way researchers viewed artificial intelligence. Alex, the 14-year-old physicist from London, was another genius who had already published groundbreaking research on quantum mechanics. He had managed to propose a model for faster-than-light travel, something many had considered impossible. His theories were highly complex and had earned him spots in prestigious universities, where he was a guest lecturer despite still being in high school. Then there was Kai, the 10-year-old boy from Seoul, who had written his first computer program at the age of 6 and was now designing his own operating system. His skills weren't limited to software. He had already built several fully functioning machines and was known for his unconventional problem-solving abilities. Elon knew all about these kids. He'd read their papers, watched their interviews, and followed their work from afar. They were exceptional, geniuses who had already made monumental strides in their respective fields. But Elon didn't become who he was by underestimating his competitors, no matter their age. He had seen kids like this before. When he was young, there were kids in his class who seemed to grasp complex concepts far more quickly than he did. But he had learned how to beat them not by relying solely on intellect, but through sheer perseverance, creativity, and the willingness to take risks that others wouldn't dare. That had been his secret weapon then, and it would be his weapon now. As Elon sat at his workstation, he reflected on the stakes. It wasn't just his pride on the line. This competition could determine the future of his companies and his legacy. For all his talk of creating a sustainable future and pushing humanity to new heights, this was the ultimate test of his own creative capacity. He glanced up from his screen, taking in the sight of Mia, Alex, and Kai, also focused on their projects. They weren't just smart, they were operating on a level that even he had to admit was extraordinary. Elon rubbed his eyes. This wasn't just a test of knowledge. It was a test of adaptability, creativity, and the ability to take risks in uncharted territories. It wasn't enough to have a great idea. He needed to prove that he could pivot, think on his feet, and still be a step ahead. "All right, Elon," he muttered to himself. "You've faced rockets, electric cars, and AI before. But this is something else." It was time to show them what he could do. He began typing furiously, his mind already racing ahead of his fingers. The challenge ahead of him was formidable, but Elon Musk wasn't the kind of person to back down from a challenge, especially not one like this. As the hours ticked on and the night wore deeper, Elon Musk became more and more consumed with his work. He was already facing the harsh reality that his initial ideas were falling short. The tech he had hoped would carry him through was proving more difficult than expected. It was a sobering moment, a reminder that even someone as experienced as he was couldn't rely on his past successes alone. But as he glanced over at the young prodigies working tirelessly, a new determination began to form. He couldn't allow himself to be outdone by kids. They were brilliant, yes, but so was he. And he wasn't going to let a bunch of kids take him down without a fight. "Let's see what you've got," Elon muttered under his breath, and then returned to his screen, diving headfirst into the challenge ahead. Little did he know, this would become the defining moment of his career. A battle not just for victory, but for relevance in a world that was changing faster than even he could keep up with. As the clock continued to tick, one thing was clear. This competition would not just test the limits of his intellect. It would force him to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about the future and about himself. The sound of clacking keyboards echoed through the laboratory, punctuated by the occasional hum of machinery. Elon Musk sat hunched over his workstation, his eyes scanning the lines of code on the screen. He had been at it for hours, debugging his initial design, trying to optimize the algorithms for energy efficiency. But something wasn't clicking. Despite his vast knowledge, years of experience, and unparalleled resources, his system wasn't coming together the way he'd hoped. Across the room, Mia, Alex, and Kai worked with an intensity that Elon could only admire. Mia was furiously typing, her fingers a blur as she built upon the AI neural network that was the backbone of her design. Her setup was simple but elegant, several monitors displaying real-time simulations and variables. She didn't need the flashy resources that Elon had at his disposal. Her brilliance was in her ability to think outside the box, something Elon realized he might have underestimated. Alex, on the other hand, was deep into theoretical equations, scribbling on a massive whiteboard that had grown cluttered with complex quantum diagrams. The young physicist had already solved a problem that Elon had been struggling with for hours, optimizing the energy flow for his machine. Elon glanced over at Alex, who was completely absorbed in his calculations. The kid didn't even seem to notice the clock ticking away. Then there was Kai, the 10-year-old hardware wizard. He had a different approach. While Elon was designing an energy system based on renewable sources like solar and wind, Kai was experimenting with entirely new energy-generating mechanisms. His prototype, a small device the size of a coffee mug, was already generating a steady flow of electricity using motion sensors. It was unlike anything Elon had ever seen, and it was working. The kid was creating something out of nothing, with nothing more than a few spare parts and a mind that couldn't be confined to conventional limits. Elon couldn't help but feel a prickling sensation of doubt creep in. It was a foreign feeling, one he wasn't used to experiencing. Here he was, sitting in front of some of the most advanced technology ever developed. Yet the kids were outpacing him, and not just by a little. They were ahead in leaps and bounds. He could see the future unfolding before him, but he wasn't the one driving the narrative. The kids were. The reality was starting to hit him. These prodigies were more than just bright. They were visionaries, and their innovative approaches were leaving Elon to play catch-up. He could feel the pressure mounting as the seconds ticked down on the clock. The competition was no longer theoretical. It was real, and the world was watching. "How's it going over here?" Elon asked, forcing a casual tone as he walked over to Mia's workstation. He knew the question was more about him than it was about her, but he couldn't help himself. The tension in the room was palpable, and it was hard not to acknowledge it. Mia didn't look up from her screen. "It's going well," she said, her voice steady. "I've implemented the neural feedback system, and the machine's performance is improving exponentially with each cycle. It's learning from itself." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Learning from itself?" Mia nodded, her face a picture of concentration. "I've programmed the AI to optimize its energy output based on the data it collects. It adapts to the environment in real time, adjusting to changes in light, heat, and wind speed. It's more efficient than any static system." Elon stood there for a moment, processing what she had said. She was talking about a system that could essentially re-engineer itself based on environmental variables, making it more sustainable than any solar or wind system Elon had ever envisioned. It was brilliant, and it was beyond anything he had come up with in the last few hours. "You've got some serious skills," Elon admitted, a flicker of respect in his voice. "But the real challenge is scalability. You can't just throw a bunch of sensors and hope they'll work for a large-scale system." Mia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a moment to adjust a few settings, running another simulation. Then, without looking up, she replied, "It's not about throwing things together. It's about creating something that can grow. The system learns as it scales. It's self-sustaining." Elon stood there, almost speechless. She was talking about building a dynamic system, one that could grow and adapt based on real-world conditions, not unlike how a biological organism evolves. It was visionary in a way that even he hadn't thought of, and that realization stung. This wasn't just smart, it was disruptive, and he was falling behind. Across the room, Alex continued to write on his whiteboard, the symbols and equations growing more complex by the minute. Elon could barely understand the work being done in front of him. Quantum mechanics was not a field he was deeply versed in, but he could recognize the importance of what Alex was doing. The teenager had already created a model that Elon had never even considered, a way to break down energy at a quantum level to maximize efficiency. Elon was tempted to approach him, but he didn't want to interrupt. Alex's work was fascinating, but it seemed like something Elon might not be able to grasp in the time they had. Still, the approach was revolutionary. If Alex's model worked as it seemed to, it would create a new way of thinking about energy systems entirely, something that could leapfrog traditional methods like solar or wind. Then there was Kai. The kid was an enigma. At 10 years old, he was already building functioning machines from spare parts. Elon watched as Kai soldered pieces of metal together with incredible precision, his tiny hands working with the focus of someone twice his age. It wasn't just his age that amazed Elon. It was his approach to the problem. While the others were diving deep into software and theoretical physics, Kai was doing what Elon did best, building something tangible, something real. Elon leaned against the desk, watching Kai for a moment. "What are you working on, kid?" Kai didn't look up. "Energy generator. Motion-powered. I'm using the principles of kinetic energy to generate electricity." Elon furrowed his brow. "Kinetic energy?" Kai grinned, his face lighting up with excitement. "Yeah, when you move something, you create energy. I'm using the motion of a rotating device to charge a small battery. It's not as efficient as solar, but it's a lot more compact and versatile." Elon's mind raced. Kai wasn't talking about a traditional energy generator. He was talking about harnessing energy from something as simple as movement, something that could be used anywhere, anytime, without relying on the weather or sunlight. It was brilliant in its simplicity, and in a way, it was exactly the kind of thinking that Elon himself had built his career on. But as the hours wore on, the pressure only grew. Elon's system still wasn't ready. Mia's AI was evolving at a rapid pace. Alex's quantum model was already making leaps in efficiency, and Kai was inching closer to a working prototype. Elon had to face the truth. His approach wasn't working. The systems he had built, the resources he had at his disposal, they were no longer enough. He wasn't just competing against the kids' ideas. He was competing against their vision. The world was changing faster than he could adapt, and for the first time in his life, he felt a deep sense of uncertainty. Could he pull it together in time? Could he still be the one to lead the way into the future, or had these kids already passed him by? As the clock ticked down, one thing was clear. Elon Musk was at a crossroads, and the decisions he made in the next few hours would determine whether he could continue to shape the future, or whether the future would leave him behind. The countdown clock on the wall flickered, the bright red numbers now dipping below the 5-hour mark. Each passing second seemed to stretch, elongating the weight of the challenge that loomed over the competitors. Elon Musk could feel the strain in his shoulders and in the tightening of his jaw. This wasn't just another problem to solve. This was his legacy at stake. He glanced over at Mia again, her fingers never faltering as she adjusted her neural algorithm. Then his gaze shifted to Alex, still scribbling feverishly on the whiteboard, as if trying to decipher some ancient code that could unlock a new era of energy generation. Finally, there was Kai, who had built a working prototype out of discarded parts, a small, whirring machine that somehow seemed to hum with the quiet promise of future innovation. Elon could feel the weight of their collective brilliance pressing against him, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he was going to make it. But then, like a jolt of electricity, a thought struck him. He was trying to compete on their terms, on their turf. His years of innovation in rockets, electric cars, and space travel had conditioned him to think in terms of vast systems and complex engineering. But these kids, they weren't bound by the same limitations. They didn't have the baggage of a decade of corporate culture, of billion-dollar budgets, or even the weight of expectations. They were free to think outside the box in a way he hadn't been able to for years. What if, instead of trying to outsmart them at their own game, he started thinking like them? What if he leaned into the same raw, unfiltered creativity that made his early projects so successful? He had built rockets from scratch with limited resources, innovated on technologies that seemed impossible at the time. He'd found a way to look past the conventional, and that was what had made him who he was. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered his next move. It wasn't enough to just fix his current design. He needed to break free from his rigid thinking. He had to take risks. The key to winning this competition, he realized, wasn't about having the best solution. It was about taking the most creative, unconventional approach. Elon stood up and stretched, then walked over to the back of the lab, where a collection of discarded parts and tools sat on a cluttered table. He grabbed a few random components, motors, wires, capacitors, things that had no business being together, at least not in the way they were meant to be used. He felt like he was back in the early days, when he and his friends would mess around in his garage, building things just to see if they could make them work. The process was chaotic, but somewhere in the middle of the mess, something began to click. He could hear the sounds of the others still working, but in that moment, they seemed to fade into the background. It was just him, surrounded by mismatched parts, and the idea that he could do something revolutionary if he just let go of the constraints that had started to define his thinking. Back at their workstations, the young prodigies were all racing toward their own breakthroughs, each confident that their design would come out on top. But there was a new energy in the room now. It wasn't just the pressure of the clock ticking down. It was the realization that this competition had become more than just a challenge. It had become a battle of ideologies, of vision. Mia's system was evolving at a rapid pace. She was connecting her AI to a wide array of sensors that could capture real-time environmental data. She had already calculated the energy efficiency of her design and was optimizing it further. But now, her thoughts began to drift toward the future. This wasn't just a prototype anymore. It was the blueprint for something that could change the world. But that was the problem. For the first time, Mia realized that she was so focused on perfection that she might be losing sight of the bigger picture. Her AI was smart, but it was also a little too narrow. She was solving problems one at a time, but she wasn't thinking about how it would fit into a larger system. Maybe that was the flaw in her thinking. Maybe her genius was in creating something too abstract, something too complex for the world to digest in one go. As the hours passed, she adjusted her algorithm once again. She had to balance the brilliance of her design with practicality. The real test wasn't just the machine. It was whether the world could accept her vision. She needed to simplify it, to scale it down. But as she looked across the room, her eyes found Elon. She had to admit, his intensity was contagious. He wasn't just looking at his system. He was looking at the world. And in that moment, Mia realized that she had been so focused on the data that she had lost track of the kind of creativity that had driven her in the first place. Across from her, Alex was still engrossed in his quantum model, and Mia could see him making small adjustments to his algorithms. The young physicist was now designing a computer that could simulate quantum mechanics to predict future energy fluctuations. His model was brilliant, but as he paused to adjust one of the equations, he too seemed to realize that his system might be too theoretical. Alex wanted to change the world, but he had been so focused on theory and equations that he was losing sight of how to make his idea practical. His quantum machine could generate energy more efficiently, but it would take years, decades, maybe, for it to be realized in the real world. He had to make it more tangible. His focus had to shift. And then there was Kai, who had been quiet for a long time. The kid was focused, but unlike the others, he wasn't worried about perfection. He wasn't measuring and recalculating every second. Instead, he was testing things, constantly testing. He had built his machine, yes, but the real work was in refining it, in seeing what worked and what didn't in real time. His small kinetic power generator had been producing energy, but it was inconsistent. It wasn't efficient enough to be practical on a large scale. But unlike the others, Kai didn't seem fazed. He had built the machine himself with spare parts. He wasn't going to be beaten by a little thing like inefficiency. He understood that failure was just part of the process, and he was willing to throw away his prototype if it didn't work. He wasn't looking for the perfect solution. He was looking for the right one, and he knew it was out there. With only 2 hours left, Elon's machine began to take shape. He had designed a hybrid system, part AI, part kinetic energy, with a neural interface that allowed the system to learn from both environmental conditions and physical movement. It wasn't perfect, but it was something new, something no one had ever tried before. It was a strange combination of chaos and brilliance, and it felt like the perfect solution for where the world was headed. This wasn't just an energy system. It was a model for future tech, a framework for understanding how disparate systems could coexist and evolve together. The energy from the motion sensors fed into a battery storage system, which then communicated with the AI to adjust output based on real-time data. Elon smiled to himself. It was unconventional, risky, and untested, but it felt right. For the first time in the competition, he felt a sense of freedom. The ideas had stopped being about winning and started being about something bigger, about how the future could be reimagined. As the clock ticked down to the final hour, Elon looked around the room. Mia, Alex, and Kai were all on the brink of their own breakthroughs. But now, more than ever, Elon realized that this competition wasn't just about who would win. It was about how these prodigies, these children, would change the world in ways he couldn't have predicted. And perhaps, Just perhaps, Elon Musk was about to experience the greatest shift of all. A lesson in humility, in creativity, and in the power of the next generation. The end was near. But the real journey was just beginning. The countdown timer flashed in bright, relentless red. Now less than an hour remained. Each second felt like an eternity, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something monumental to happen. Elon Musk sat in front of his machine, staring at the screen that displayed his design. But his mind was somewhere else, lost in the maze of equations and failed attempts that had come before. The tension in the lab was palpable. Mia was hunched over her monitors, her eyes darting from one screen to the next, tweaking code with a feverish intensity. Alex was still at his whiteboard, muttering to himself as he scribbled in the margins of his calculations. Kai, quiet as always, was hunched over his kinetic generator, adjusting wires with methodical precision. The contrast in their approaches was staggering. Mia was working in the abstract. Her AI design was a masterpiece of theoretical physics, an algorithm capable of revolutionizing energy efficiency. Alex was trying to build something that had never been built before, a quantum energy machine that could potentially change the laws of physics as we understood them. Kai, on the other hand, was playing in the dirt, so to speak, building prototypes with the raw, unrefined energy of a child's curiosity. But there was a genius in that simplicity. Elon had to admit it. They were all playing at a level he hadn't anticipated. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if his own approach was enough. His mind kept drifting back to the hours they'd spent before, when the first moments of doubt crept in. It wasn't just that the kids were brilliant. It was that they had something he lacked: raw, unfiltered creativity. It was the kind of creativity that didn't have to deal with the realities of budget constraints, the constraints of business, or the weight of a legacy. The realization hit him harder than he wanted to admit. In trying to build the perfect, scalable energy system, he'd buried himself in complexity. Maybe he was still thinking like an engineer trying to solve a technical problem instead of like a visionary trying to unlock something bigger. The kids, though, Mia, Alex, and Kai, were building something simpler, but in its simplicity, it was revolutionary. Mia tapped her fingers on her desk, looking at the clock, and felt her stomach tighten. She was so close. Her AI system was predicting energy needs in real time, adjusting efficiency on the fly, but there was something about it that didn't feel right. It was working, yes, but it was too perfect, too mechanical. Could it be scalable? Could the world really adopt this? What if the world wasn't ready for something this advanced? She thought of the millions of people who would need access to this kind of technology. What if they couldn't afford the sensors, the AI-based equipment, the infrastructure? The answer was clear. This needed to be something more accessible, more adaptable. Could her system work for a person in the middle of a desert with nothing but the wind and the sun? Could it work for a farmer in sub-Saharan Africa without internet or electricity? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen by the paradox. She had created a system that was theoretically perfect, but practically inaccessible. That wasn't enough. Elon's voice broke through her thoughts. Mia. She looked up, startled. Elon was standing in front of her workstation, staring down at the simulations that filled her screen. You've built something amazing here, Elon said, his voice low but steady. But it feels like you're creating a solution that's too complex for the problems we're facing. This needs to be simpler, more accessible. What good is a perfect machine if it's only accessible to a few? Mia stared at him, surprised by the bluntness of his words. I know, she whispered, almost embarrassed. I was so focused on making it work perfectly that I lost sight of who it's really for. Across the room, Alex's face was pale, his hands trembling as he erased and rewrote equations, his chalk moving frantically across the whiteboard. It was the same thing over and over again, a loop of seemingly endless calculations. But none of it was leading him to the breakthrough he so desperately needed. Quantum mechanics, he had learned, was not just hard, it was confounding. The equations made sense on paper, but when it came time to apply them, they led to results that didn't match up with the real world. He had the energy models. He had the quantum data, but it wasn't enough. With only minutes left on the clock, Alex took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. It has to work, he muttered under his breath. It has to. But the more he stared at the board, the more it became apparent. His system was too theoretical. It was too untested, too abstract. He needed to make something that worked now, not in 10 years. Something the world could use today. The pressure was suffocating. The eyes of the world were on him, on all of them. And he knew that if he didn't deliver, he would be seen as nothing more than another kid with big ideas. That fear of failing, of falling short, was something Alex had never let himself experience. But here it was, raw and real, clawing at his insides. And then there was Kai, still silent at his desk, working quietly, his face the picture of youthful concentration. His kinetic energy prototype had been working, but it was inconsistent. The machine would generate power, but it would sometimes short out or stop working entirely. He kept adjusting, testing, recalibrating. But he knew deep down that his design, while creative, wasn't perfect. He knew what the others didn't. It didn't matter. He wasn't trying to make the perfect system. He was trying to make something that worked, even if it wasn't perfect. But as the clock wound down, Kai's thoughts turned inward. He didn't want to disappoint anyone. Not Elon, not Mia, not Alex. But most of all, he didn't want to disappoint himself. This was his chance to prove that he could build something that really worked. Something real. But as he tightened a final wire, something in the back of his mind whispered, "What if it doesn't work?" In those final moments, the room fell into an eerie silence. The countdown clock was ticking down, only seconds remaining, and each of the competitors was now in their own head, wrestling with their thoughts, their doubts, and the realization that the world would soon know the results. Elon looked at his prototype one last time, taking a deep breath. He wasn't sure if it would work. He wasn't sure if it was good enough. But he knew one thing. It was his. It was his own creation, a combination of chaos and calculated risk. For the first time in hours, he felt a calmness settle over him. Whatever happened next, he knew he had pushed himself to think differently. He had dared to take risks in a way he hadn't done in years. The final seconds of the countdown began to tick away. Elon, Mia, Alex, and Kai stood by their respective workstations, holding their breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The world was watching. And then, the timer hit 0. The silence was deafening. The final second of the countdown hit with a sharp beep, and for a moment, everything was still. The hum of the machines, the whir of the lights overhead, even the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, all seemed to fade into nothingness. The room was thick with the tension of anticipation, of unknown outcomes. Elon stood motionless for a second, staring at his prototype. The machine hummed quietly, and for the first time in hours, he allowed himself a deep breath. It hadn't blown up, at least. That was a small victory. Mia sat at her workstation, her hands frozen above her keyboard. Her AI system blinked softly on the screen, but the earlier sense of triumph had been replaced with a gnawing doubt. She had optimized her design to the nth degree, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't done enough. Was it too complex? Too inaccessible? Too theoretical to matter in the real world? Alex stared at the whiteboard, the equations still scrawled there, his mind now too exhausted to make sense of them. He had pushed his quantum system to the limits of possibility, but had it really worked? Was it just another theoretical masterpiece, doomed to never escape the lab? And then there was Kai. He was hunched over his kinetic generator, his fingers trembling as he checked the final output. It was working barely. The small machine had generated a steady flow of energy, but it wasn't nearly enough to compete with the others. The prototype had potential, but it wasn't going to change the world in the way he'd hoped. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of footsteps approaching. The organizers, a team of engineers and scientists, entered the lab, their faces a mixture of awe and curiosity. They had been watching from the observation room, but now, the moment had arrived. It was time to see what the Prodigies had created. "All right," one of them said, a tall, gray-haired man who had been overseeing the competition. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of excitement. "Let's see what you've got." One by one, the teams approached the front of the room, where the main evaluation station was set up. Each machine was connected to a central monitoring system, allowing the judges to evaluate the energy output, efficiency, and viability of the designs. The stakes were high. This wasn't just a competition for bragging rights. The winner would have the opportunity to pitch their invention to global leaders, to secure funding, and to reshape the future of energy. Mia went first. She walked up to her station with an air of quiet determination, but inside, she was torn. Her AI was revolutionary in theory, but was it practical? She pressed a button on the console to activate her system. The screen flickered to life, displaying the real-time data of energy flow, environmental variables, and efficiency metrics. The judges watched intently as the numbers danced across the screen. Mia held her breath as the system adjusted its algorithms, attempting to optimize the output in real time. For a few moments, it seemed flawless. The machine was running smoothly, adapting to the simulated environment. But then, a warning appeared on the screen. System overload. Mia's heart sank. The judges exchanged glances, nodding as they observed the data. The AI had worked, but it hadn't scaled in the way that was needed. It was too complex, too reliant on external infrastructure. Mia stepped back from her machine, her stomach churning. I thought I had it, she said, more to herself than anyone else. I thought this would be the solution. One of the judges, a middle-aged woman with short cropped hair, smiled gently at her. It's brilliant, Mia. Truly. But you're right. The scalability is an issue. If this system had more universal application, well, then we'd be talking about a whole new world. Mia nodded, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. She had come so far. She had built something amazing, but the world wasn't ready for it. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the right path forward after all. Next was Alex. He approached his station with a look of steely resolve, even though inside, he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. His quantum machine had the potential to rewrite the laws of energy, but he had also felt the looming shadow of theory without practicality. He pressed a button, and the room fell silent. His machine activated with a low hum. The system began simulating quantum energy flows, calculating complex interactions in real time. The data began to appear on the screen in a steady stream, promising at first, but as the system attempted to stabilize, the energy readings fluctuated wildly. Not again, Alex muttered, his eyes wide with panic. The quantum machine sputtered, as if fighting against itself, before finally shutting down with an audible click. The judges exchanged looks. They had seen the potential in his design, the raw genius of his ideas, but they also saw the same problem they had seen with Mia's, beautiful in theory, but impossible to apply. His equations had worked on paper, but they didn't hold up when it came to reality. I was trying to do something big, Alex said, his voice cracking slightly, but I guess I lost sight of the real goal. Your work is extraordinary, Alex, one of the judges said kindly, but there's a gap between theory and practice that needs to be bridged. If you keep going, you could change the world, but right now, you need a more immediate solution. Alex nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He had been so close, yet so far. The weight of failure crushed him, but he also understood. He wasn't done yet. This wasn't the end, just the beginning. Finally, Kai stepped up to his station. He had spent the last few hours testing and retesting his kinetic energy prototype, tweaking every wire, recalibrating every connection. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and that, in itself, felt like a small victory. He pressed the button to activate his system. The machine hummed to life, and for a brief moment, it seemed like everything was going well. The small generator produced a steady flow of energy, albeit at a lower output than the others. It was consistent, though, something the others hadn't achieved. The judges leaned in, observing the data closely. Kai watched them, his heart pounding in his chest. The energy output wasn't high, but it was real. It was tangible. The machine worked. The head judge turned to Kai with a nod of approval. This is impressive. It's not the largest scale solution, but it's simple, it's real, and it's viable. This could be implemented on a smaller scale immediately. Kai's face lit up. He had done it. Maybe not in the way he had dreamed, but he had built something that worked. Something real. The judges took their time, discussing each design, weighing the potential of each solution. In the end, there was no clear winner. Mia, Your AI system is revolutionary, but it needs more refinement for scalability, one judge said. Alex, your quantum machine is groundbreaking, but it's not yet ready for practical use. And Kai, your kinetic system is the most practical of all, but we need to see more development to increase its efficiency. Elon, who had been observing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. I've seen all of your work. You've all created something unique, something that will shape the future in ways we can't even fully grasp yet. The world isn't ready for your ideas yet, but that's not a failure. It's a challenge, and you will meet that challenge because you're all visionaries. As the judges began their deliberations, Elon reflected on the journey. These prodigies, despite their youth, had opened his eyes to something he had nearly lost: the raw power of unfiltered creativity. They weren't bound by the constraints of industry or expectation. They were building for a future that hadn't yet been written. And in that moment, Elon realized that perhaps the true victory wasn't in having the best design. It was in igniting the spark that would fuel a generation of innovators to come. The future was in their hands, and this was just the beginning. For all of them, the world had just seen the next wave of great minds. The aftermath of the competition left the lab in a state of quiet contemplation. The judges had left, and the prodigies had returned to their respective workstations, each one deep in thought. Despite the fact that no one had emerged with a clear, definitive victory, there was a sense of mutual respect in the air. The pressure had been immense, but so too was the realization that each of them had taken a significant step forward. Elon stood by the door, arms crossed, his mind working in overdrive. The outcome of the competition had been unexpected, but in many ways, it had confirmed something that he had known deep down for years. Innovation wasn't just about being the smartest, or even about having the best idea. It was about the relentless pursuit of progress, the willingness to fail, and then to learn and try again. He had seen the brilliance in each of the kids' designs. Mia's AI system was ahead of its time, capable of predicting energy usage and optimizing efficiency in real time, though it needed simplification. Alex's quantum machine, while still untested in practical applications, had the potential to revolutionize energy storage. And Kai, with his kinetic energy prototype, had proven that sometimes simple solutions could be the most practical and effective. But what struck him the most was their tenacity, the way they refused to be defeated by failure. They weren't discouraged by the lack of perfection. Instead, they were fueled by the desire to make their visions real. It was something he hadn't seen in years, a reminder of his own journey in those early days at Tesla and SpaceX. The setbacks had been many, but the drive to push forward, to continue innovating, had never faded. Elon walked over to the three prodigies, who had gathered at one of the tables, exchanging ideas and quietly analyzing their machines. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice calm but with an underlying intensity. "Listen," Elon began, his eyes scanning the group. "None of you failed today. We didn't see the finished product, but we saw the spark, the potential. That's what matters." Mia looked up first, her eyes still filled with uncertainty. "But we didn't win. I thought this was supposed to be the moment when we proved we could change the world. But all we've done is show how much we still need to learn." Elon shook his head, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. Winning isn't always about having the perfect solution right out of the gate. It's about realizing that you can change the world, just not in the way you first imagined. Your ideas are ahead of their time, Mia. The world isn't ready yet, but it will be. And when that time comes, you'll be the one leading the charge. He turned to Alex, who was still staring at his whiteboard, scribbling equations he was barely able to keep up with. "Alex, you're trying to reinvent the wheel. That's admirable, but you're also building a plane before you've even mastered the car. Quantum energy is the future, but it's not something that's going to be realized in a day. Take the time to learn from today's failures, and in time, your system will be ready to change everything." Finally, he turned to Kai, who had been quietly working on adjusting his kinetic machine. Kai didn't speak much, but his determination was palpable. "Kai, your prototype worked. It wasn't perfect, but you're onto something. Simplicity is power. It's something that the rest of us overlook when we get bogged down in the complexities. Build on that, and you'll be a force to be reckoned with." The three of them exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from doubt to something more hopeful. Elon could see it. The fire was still there. It was just waiting to be stoked. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. The lab was buzzing with the hum of machines, the clink of tools, and the steady rhythm of brainstorming sessions. Elon was there nearly every day, offering advice and challenging the Prodigies to rethink their designs. The world outside had already begun to take notice of the young Prodigies and their work. News outlets, universities, and even venture capitalists were eager to see what came next. But inside the lab, it was back to the grind. No one was thinking about fame or recognition. They were thinking about the next breakthrough, the next iteration. Each of them had learned something invaluable from the competition. That failure wasn't the end of the road, but the beginning of a new journey. Mia's AI system had undergone a radical transformation. She had stripped away the unnecessary complexity, refining it until it was simple enough to be adopted by the average person. She had focused on making the system more accessible, something that could be used in remote villages without the need for advanced infrastructure. And she had realized that AI wasn't just about automating processes. It was about empowering individuals to make smarter decisions in real time. Her system wasn't just about efficiency. It was about creating empowerment for the users. One day, as Mia was testing the new version of her system, Elon watched from across the room, his arms crossed. She had made significant progress, but there was still something in her eyes, an unspoken uncertainty. "How are you feeling about it?" Elon asked, walking over. Mia paused, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. "Better. Much better. But I don't know if it's enough yet. It still feels like I'm not quite there." Elon smiled and leaned against the desk. "You will be. The world isn't looking for perfection, Mia. It's looking for progress. And you're on the right path." Mia nodded, though there was still a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Elon could tell that she was her own harshest critic. But he knew, like all true innovators, that her biggest breakthroughs would come not from her successes, but from the lessons she learned along the way. Meanwhile, Alex had thrown himself into a new direction. Instead of trying to create an entirely new energy system, he had shifted his focus to improving the existing technology. He realized that while quantum mechanics was the future, it didn't have to be the starting point. He could create smaller, more achievable systems that could be developed today, laying the foundation for the quantum revolution he dreamed of tomorrow. He worked tirelessly, revising his equations and testing new models. He no longer sought perfection. He sought efficiency and practicality. His new approach wasn't about groundbreaking, world-changing inventions, but about making incremental progress that could eventually lead to the breakthroughs he sought. One afternoon, while sitting with Elon and the others in the lab, Alex finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. "You know," he said, running a hand through his hair, "I thought I had to build something revolutionary right out of the gate. But now I see that it's the small steps that get you there. It's not the big leap. It's the slow, steady climb." Elon nodded. "Exactly. Sometimes you've got to crawl before you can walk. And when you're ready to run, you'll be unstoppable." As for Kai, his kinetic energy prototype had undergone a series of refinements. He had simplified the design even further, focusing on materials and mechanics that were easily accessible and inexpensive. The goal was not just to create a device that generated energy, but to create a device that could be replicated and scaled easily, particularly in underdeveloped regions of the world. One evening, while testing his latest iteration, Kai turned to Elon with a grin. "I think I've cracked it. It's not perfect, but it works. It's small, simple, and it's practical." Elon surveyed the machine. "It's beautiful in its simplicity," he said. "This could be a game-changer for off-grid communities." "You've got something real here, Kai." Kai's eyes lit up with pride. "It's just a start, but it feels good to know that it might actually make a difference." As the weeks turned into months, the three prodigies grew more confident in their work, and Elon found himself inspired by their relentless pursuit of innovation. There was something refreshing about their approach. No egos, no self-doubt, just a raw desire to build something that would last. They were on their way to changing the world, not through grand gestures or monumental breakthroughs, but through persistence, learning, and the relentless pursuit of a better future. And Elon Musk, for all his own achievements, knew that he was standing at the precipice of something bigger, something that had the potential to change the course of history once again. The world would have to wait a little longer, but he had no doubt that these prodigies were the future. The road ahead was long, but it was one they would walk together. The months that followed their progress were not as smooth as they had hoped. While the prodigies were making remarkable strides in their respective fields, the external pressures began to mount. What had begun as a hopeful collaboration soon transformed into a series of real-world challenges that tested their resolve, their vision, and in some cases, their very belief in the work they were doing. It started small, just a comment here and there from the outside world. Critics, detractors. Elon had experienced this before, but it was a new reality for Mia, Alex, and Kai. There were whispers in the media about the wasted potential of youth, the idea that these prodigies had been given an opportunity that they weren't ready for, that their ideas were too theoretical or not practical enough. These voices grew louder with time. Soon, social media was ablaze with debates about whether young inventors like them were truly capable of making an impact, or if they were simply chasing pipe dreams. Elon, ever the battle-tested visionary, had seen it all before. He had dealt with Wall Street skeptics, industry giants who scoffed at his ambitions, and even well-meaning colleagues who doubted the long-term viability of Tesla and SpaceX. But he was no stranger to the kind of backlash that came with challenging the status quo. What worried him was how his prodigies would handle it. Mia was the first to be affected. The criticism about her AI system being too complicated began to sink in, and with each passing day, she found it harder to push through the doubts. She had been so certain that her AI could revolutionize the energy landscape. But now, there were moments when she wondered if she was trying to fix a problem that was too big to solve, especially with the limited resources and time she had. One evening, after a long day of testing and troubleshooting, she collapsed into a chair, exhausted. Elon was sitting across from her, reviewing some data from Kai's latest prototype. She hadn't said a word for hours, but he could sense her frustration. "You okay?" Elon asked, looking up from his notes. Mia hesitated, staring down at the screen in front of her. "I don't know, Elon. I thought I had it figured out, but maybe it's too much. Maybe it's not what the world needs right now." Elon leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "Mia, I've been where you are. I've had days where everything felt impossible, where I couldn't see the path forward. But I promise you, what you're working on isn't just important. It's the future. You're changing the way people interact with technology. And the world might not get it now, but that's just because they aren't ready for what you're offering." Mia swallowed, trying to hold back the frustration. But what if they're right? What if my ideas are just too far ahead? Elon's voice became more resolute. "It doesn't matter if they're too far ahead. You're not building for now. You're building for tomorrow. Keep pushing. Trust me, if you back down now, you're going to regret it." She took a deep breath, a mix of determination and doubt swirling inside her. Elon was right. She couldn't let the voices outside sway her from her vision. But it didn't make the burden any lighter. For Alex, the pressure came in a different form. His quantum machine, while still not practical for everyday use, had drawn the attention of some of the brightest minds in the field of energy. But there was a catch. Several of these experts were eager to collaborate with him. At first, the offers seemed like a dream come true. However, as the weeks wore on, Alex began to feel the weight of these collaborations more and more. One particular company, a major player in the renewable energy sector, had expressed interest in his quantum system. They wanted to sponsor him and fund further development. Alex was thrilled at the prospect. It felt like validation. But when he met with the team from the company, it quickly became clear that their vision for his work was not aligned with his own. They wanted to turn his system into a commercial product, fast. They were interested in profit margins, scalability, and market dominance. Alex was being asked to simplify his equations, to streamline the process, and remove any unnecessary complexity. But for Alex, the complexity was the heart of his quantum theory. To simplify it meant compromising the core principles he believed in. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, Alex stared at his whiteboard, covered in equations and theories. He could feel the pressure mounting, the whispers of compromise tempting him. The offer was too lucrative to ignore. But at what cost? His phone buzzed with a message from Elon. "You still with me?" Alex took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the screen before he typed back. "Not sure. They want me to dumb it down. But I'm afraid that if I do, it won't be my work anymore." Elon's response was quick. "If you water down your vision, you won't be changing the world. You'll just be another cog in the machine. Take the time you need, but don't lose yourself in the process." Alex closed his eyes, his mind racing. He knew what he had to do, but the fear of missing out on the funding, the pressure to deliver, and the temptation of quick success all loomed over him. It was a crossroads he hadn't expected so soon. Kai's challenges were more practical in nature. While his kinetic energy system was producing results, it was far from ready for mass production. The components were difficult to source, and the machine itself wasn't as efficient as it needed to be. Kai spent countless hours in the lab, his hands calloused from the hours of welding, calibrating, and tweaking. But with each test, it seemed like something new went wrong. His biggest struggle, however, wasn't the technical issues. It was his fear that he wasn't cut out for this kind of work. Kai had always been the quiet one of the group, the most reserved, and while his machine worked in theory, it often failed in practice. He found himself wondering if he had taken on too much, if his dreams were too big for someone who had only been tinkering with prototypes a few years ago. One afternoon, as he sat in front of his prototype, something broke inside him. His latest test had failed, and the generator sputtered to a halt, sending a sharp, disheartening noise through the room. Kai's head dropped into his hands, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel defeated. Elon walked in just as Kai was sitting there, overwhelmed. He had been quiet lately, and Elon had noticed. "Hey," Elon said, his voice softer than usual. "What's going on?" Kai didn't look up at first, but when he finally did, his eyes were filled with exhaustion. "I don't know if I can do this. Maybe I'm just not built for this kind of work. My system keeps failing, and I don't know how much longer I can keep trying." Elon sat down beside him, his voice low but firm. "Kai, you're building something that will change the world. The world's not going to give you an easy ride. If you want to make a real impact, you're going to face failure more times than you care to count. But it's not the failures that matter. It's what you learn from them. You're not failing, Kai. You're learning. And every mistake you make is one step closer to getting it right." Kai swallowed, his mind swirling with doubt. "But what if it's not enough?" "It will be," Elon said, his eyes locking onto Kai's. "You just have to keep moving forward. You're not in this alone." Despite their struggles, the Prodigies pressed on. It wasn't just the technical challenges they faced. It was the weight of the expectations placed on them, the pressure to succeed in a world that demanded results fast. They had believed that their ideas would be the answer, but the reality was far more complicated. Still, Elon's words stayed with them. They weren't failing, they were learning. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, they began to realize that the journey they were on was just as important as the destination. It wasn't about quick success. It was about forging a future that would last, a future that wasn't built on easy wins, but on the lessons learned through struggle, failure, and, ultimately, perseverance. The world was waiting for the next great breakthrough, and despite the challenges, they were all still in the game. The true test of innovation wasn't whether you could make it easy. It was whether you had the courage to push through the hard parts. And they were about to find out just how much they were truly capable of. The weeks had passed like a blur. Mia, Alex, and Kai had been locked in their own worlds, tinkering with code, equations, and prototypes, each of them pushing the limits of what they thought was possible. But the constant pressure was starting to weigh heavily on them. The criticism from outsiders had only grown louder, and even Elon, with his steady optimism, couldn't always shield them from the harsh realities of innovation. But it was in the midst of their darkest days that something unexpected happened, a breakthrough that none of them had seen coming. It began with Mia, whose AI system was still struggling to meet the scalability demands that the outside world was clamoring for. One evening, while reviewing some data from a test run, she stumbled upon something strange. The system had begun generating a pattern, an anomaly, one that she hadn't programmed. It was a new kind of predictive model, one that could optimize its own learning process. At first, She thought it was a glitch. But as she dug deeper, she realized something profound. Her AI wasn't just learning from data, it was learning from itself. It was evolving, adapting in a way that was far more advanced than anything she had originally intended. It was almost as if her AI was trying to solve its own inefficiencies. Mia's heart raced as she spent hours analyzing the new model, tweaking algorithms, and testing the system's response to the anomaly. The more she worked, the clearer it became. She wasn't just on the verge of a minor improvement, she was staring at the future of AI. The kind of self-learning, self-evolving system that could drastically change everything, from how we interacted with technology to how industries could manage resources. She didn't sleep for the next 48 hours, her mind consumed by the possibilities. When she finally called Elon to share her discovery, her voice trembled with excitement. "Elon, I think I've got it," Mia said, barely able to keep the excitement in check. "This system, it's not just responding to input anymore. It's learning from its own mistakes. It's self-optimizing." Elon, who had been quietly working on his own project, paused. "Self-optimizing? That's huge. You've essentially unlocked a new layer of AI capability. It's like it's teaching itself how to be better." Mia nodded. "Exactly. And if we can refine this, we might be able to create an AI that can handle not just specific tasks, but entire industries. It can solve problems faster than we could ever program it to do. It could be the catalyst for everything we're trying to build: energy systems, smart cities, even healthcare." Elon's mind raced. He had always known that the future of technology would be driven by self-evolving systems. But this was beyond anything he had anticipated, even with his high expectations. "Mia, this could change the world, but we need to make sure we're ready for it. We need to test it, refine it, and most importantly, we need to keep the human element in the loop. AI like this could have massive implications, both positive and negative." Mia smiled, though there was still a trace of nervousness in her eyes. "I know, but this is what we've been waiting for, right? The breakthrough that moves us forward." Meanwhile, Alex's struggles with simplifying his quantum machine were starting to show signs of hope. After weeks of second-guessing himself, of wrestling with the idea of compromising his vision for the sake of commercialization, he finally made a decision. He had rejected the offers from the big corporations. It had been a tough choice, financially risky and emotionally draining. But in his heart, he knew he couldn't compromise the integrity of his work. One morning, as he was testing a new energy module, something clicked. A particular set of equations he had been struggling with suddenly made sense. He had simplified his model in a way that made it not just feasible, but practical. The quantum machine still had immense potential, but now it was grounded in reality. He had found a way to balance complexity with practicality, a delicate but necessary balance for his work to have real-world applications. Alex wasted no time. He immediately called Elon to share the news. "Elon, I did it. I think I finally found a way to make the quantum system work. It's more efficient now, and it can scale. I don't need to compromise anymore. This is the real deal." Elon was quiet for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then, with a rare excitement in his voice, he said, "Alex, that's what I've been telling you. You don't need to water down your vision. You just needed to make it feasible. This is big. Now, we need to show the world why quantum is the future." Kai, too, was starting to see glimmers of hope. After weeks of frustration and failure, his kinetic energy prototype had finally passed a crucial test. He had redesigned the system's core mechanics, using lightweight, durable materials that were easy to source. The machine wasn't just functional, it was efficient. And it could be replicated at scale, making it viable for use in remote, off-grid areas. He wasn't just building a prototype anymore. He was building a solution. And it was something that people could actually use to improve their lives. One afternoon, as he watched his machine generate power for the first time in a controlled, efficient way, Kai felt a sense of pride wash over him. This wasn't just a dream anymore. It was real. It was a tangible solution that could impact communities that needed it most. "Hey, Elon," Kai called over the phone, his voice full of relief and excitement. "I think it's finally working. I've got it." Elon, on the other end, could feel the triumph in Kai's voice. "That's amazing, Kai. I knew you could do it. What's the next step? We're ready for testing now, Kai replied. It's not perfect yet, but it's a real start. This could be the game changer we've been looking for. As the three prodigies celebrated their respective breakthroughs, Elon stood back and watched with quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just the individual successes that impressed him. It was the way the prodigies had learned to push past their fears, their failures, and their doubts. They had learned to trust their instincts and their visions, even when the world seemed to tell them they were wrong. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still many challenges ahead. But in this moment, as the lab hummed with the sounds of their newfound successes, Elon knew that they were on the verge of something bigger than any of them had initially realized. They had passed the first true test of innovation. They had pushed through the hard times, adapted, and found new paths forward. Now, it was time to show the world what they were capable of. The future had never looked so bright. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of tests, presentations, and evaluations. Elon worked tirelessly with the prodigies, helping them refine their systems, get ready for public demonstrations, and navigate the complex logistics of bringing their ideas to the world. But despite all the stress and preparation, there was a sense of calm confidence that now permeated the lab. They were no longer just hopeful innovators. They were serious contenders in the race to change the future. Each of them had faced their own unique set of challenges, and each of them had overcome them in their own way. Together, they had proven that true innovation wasn't about making perfect decisions from the start. It was about evolving, learning, and keeping the vision alive. And now, they were ready for the next phase. The world was about to see just what the future looked like. But first, they would have to convince it to believe in them. In the coming weeks, Mia, Alex, and Kai would prepare for their biggest challenge yet, presenting their work to the world, knowing that only time would tell whether they had truly changed the course of history. But for now, as the lab buzzed with anticipation and excitement, they could finally say one thing with certainty. They had turned the corner. They had taken the first step on the road to redemption, and they weren't looking back. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The time had come. After months of hard work, setbacks, and breakthroughs, the prodigies were finally ready to show the world what they had accomplished. The lab had been transformed into a state-of-the-art demonstration space, with holographic displays, interactive models, and fully functional prototypes of their groundbreaking technologies. But despite all the preparations, the nerves were palpable. Elon stood off to the side, watching the prodigies as they made final adjustments to their respective projects. It was a rare moment of calm before the storm. Mia was reviewing her AI's final optimization, ensuring that the anomaly in the learning algorithm was functioning properly. Alex was pacing in front of his quantum machine, running through the latest calculations in his head, making sure everything would work perfectly for the presentation. Kai was double-checking the connections in his kinetic energy prototype, making sure it would run without a hitch. This wasn't just another presentation. This was the moment where their work would be tested, not by a small group of scientists or investors, but by the entire world. Elon knew that the pressure they were under could either make or break them. The world was waiting, and as much as he had faith in the prodigies, even he couldn't predict how the world would respond to such ambitious ideas. But he had always believed that true innovation required courage. The courage to put yourself out there, to challenge the norms, and to be willing to risk failure in pursuit of something greater. Mia was the first to speak up, breaking the silence. She stood in front of a large screen, her fingers hovering over the control panel. "You think they're ready for this?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Elon gave her a reassuring smile. "The world isn't ready for anything that challenges the status quo, Mia, but that's why you're here. You've got something they haven't seen yet. The question is, do you believe in it?" Mia took a deep breath. She had doubted herself so many times over the past few months, but now, standing here in front of her creation, she felt the excitement bubbling up inside her. She had spent years working on this AI system, and it was finally doing something revolutionary. There was no turning back now. "I do," she said firmly, her fingers tapping a few keys to bring her system online. Elon nodded and turned to Alex and Kai. "You two ready?" Kai looked at the machine in front of him, his kinetic energy prototype humming quietly. It had taken everything he had to get this far, and yet, he knew it wasn't perfect. But no innovation ever was. As ready as I'll ever be, he said with a wry smile. Alex, always the quiet one, didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the quantum machine, his fingers grazing the control panel. The equations still echoed in his mind. They had all doubted themselves at one point, but now, he realized something important. There was no room for doubt anymore. This was the future. I'm ready, Alex said finally, his voice calm and collected. Elon stepped forward, clapping his hands together. All right, team. It's showtime. The presentation began with a video introduction that captured the essence of their journey. The sleepless nights, the doubts, the breakthroughs. It was a story of struggle, of facing insurmountable odds, and of never giving up. The video ended, and the screen switched to live footage of the lab. Elon stood in front of the podium, the Prodigies by his side. Ladies and gentlemen, Elon began, his voice calm but powerful. Today, you're going to see the future. 3 brilliant young minds have dedicated themselves to solving some of the most pressing problems of our time. Each of them has pushed the boundaries of what's possible, and today, we stand at the threshold of a new era. An era driven by self-evolving AI, quantum energy systems, and sustainable solutions that could change the world. The camera panned across the room to the eager faces of journalists, scientists, and tech enthusiasts. The energy in the room was palpable. Elon continued, First, I'd like to introduce Mia. Her work with AI isn't just about solving problems. It's about creating a system that can solve itself. Mia, take it away. Mia stepped forward, the spotlight shifting to her. She tapped a few buttons on the console, and the large screen behind her flickered to life. What you're seeing here, she began, is an AI that's capable of self-optimization. Instead of relying on a human programmer to make constant adjustments, this AI learns from its own performance and adapts in real time. She demonstrated the system's capabilities, first with a simple image recognition task, and then with a far more complex data analysis operation. The AI quickly learned from its mistakes, improving its accuracy with each iteration. The crowd gasped as the AI system began to not only solve complex problems, but also predict future challenges and find ways to optimize solutions for them. The possibilities were mind-blowing. This wasn't just an AI for today's world. This was an AI that could reshape entire industries, evolve with technological advancements, and even create new forms of intelligence. Mia looked over at Elon, her face beaming with pride. This is just the beginning, she said. Next, it was Alex's turn. He stood up and walked confidently to his quantum machine. The room fell silent as he explained his process. Quantum energy has the potential to completely change the way we think about power. Traditional energy systems are inefficient and wasteful. But quantum energy is clean, scalable, and could power entire cities with a fraction of the resources we use today. He activated the machine, and the crowd watched in awe as it began to hum with energy. The quantum system was not just theoretical anymore. It was real. Alex showed them how his new quantum energy generator could create massive energy outputs from minimal input, with no harmful byproducts. This is the future of energy, Alex said, his voice steady and confident. Imagine a world where power is virtually limitless and entirely clean, where even the most remote areas have access to energy, where every device and vehicle runs on a power source that doesn't deplete our planet's resources. The room erupted into applause. The implications of Alex's work were staggering. People were beginning to see the magnitude of what he had accomplished. Finally, it was Kai's turn. He walked up to the podium, his kinetic energy prototype humming in the background. He took a deep breath before he spoke. What you're about to see is a device that can convert kinetic energy into usable power. It's designed to harness the energy produced by human motion, whether it's walking, running, or even cycling. He activated the prototype, and the room watched as it converted the energy from a simple mechanical motion into stored power. It wasn't just theoretical, it was functional. Kai demonstrated how the system could be used to power small devices, or even generate electricity for entire communities in off-grid areas. We've designed this system to be portable, affordable, and scalable, Kai said. This could be the key to bringing sustainable energy to areas that need it most, places where traditional power grids don't exist, and where even the most basic power sources are out of reach. The crowd was spellbound. Kai's invention was more than just a breakthrough. It was a practical solution that could improve the lives of millions of people around the world. As the presentation came to a close, the room was filled with applause. Journalists rushed to the stage with questions, eager to learn more. Investors were already whispering to each other, calculating the potential returns on these revolutionary technologies. The world was watching, and the Prodigies had just shown them that the future wasn't just a dream. It was here. Elon stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold. He couldn't help but smile. The world had been skeptical, but now there was no denying it. These young minds had changed the game. They had proven that innovation wasn't about playing it safe. It was about dreaming big, failing forward, and never backing down from the challenge. The road ahead was still long, and there would be many more obstacles to overcome. But in this moment, they had done the impossible. They had shown the world that the future was not just something to wait for. It was something to create. And they had just begun. The world was buzzing. The presentation had been a resounding success. Mia, Alex, and Kai had achieved something extraordinary. News outlets from across the globe were running headlines about their innovations. Analysts were already speculating on the immense potential of their work. It was as if a seismic shift had occurred, and everyone was scrambling to understand just how far-reaching these Prodigies' discoveries could be. But as the initial excitement began to settle, the reality of what lay ahead started to hit home. Mia sat alone in her lab that evening, her fingers absently scrolling through messages on her phone. Some were congratulatory, others were inquiries from potential investors or collaborators. But there were also the more skeptical messages, the ones that questioned the ethical implications of creating a self-learning AI. One message stood out. It was from Dr. Lawrence Spencer, a well-known tech critic and AI ethicist. Mia, your AI might be a breakthrough, but are we ready for it? Self-learning AI without proper oversight could create unimaginable risks. Do you realize the power you're toying with? Mia stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. She'd been asked similar questions many times before, but this one felt different. She couldn't ignore it. The ethical ramifications of her creation had always been in the back of her mind, but now they were front and center. The AI she had built wasn't just a tool. It was a powerful, evolving entity. Could it become too powerful? Could it outgrow human control? And if it did, how would society respond? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Elon stepped into the room, his expression thoughtful but not without a glint of pride. "How's it going?" he asked, sitting down across from her. Mia shook her head. "I'm overwhelmed, honestly. This whole thing, it's bigger than I ever imagined. I can't help but think of all the risks involved. What if I've gone too far?" Elon leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You've pushed boundaries, that's true. But sometimes, pushing boundaries is the only way to make real progress. No one ever changed the world by playing it safe. But at what cost?" Mia whispered, staring down at the table. "What if we build something that we can't control? What if it starts making decisions we can't predict?" Elon was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, it was with a deep understanding, something he rarely revealed. "We've always faced these questions, Mia. Every breakthrough in history has come with fear and uncertainty. The question is not whether we should be afraid. It's how we choose to move forward responsibly. We need oversight, governance, yes. But we can't allow fear to stop us from exploring the possibilities." Mia met his gaze, her eyes filled with doubt. "And what if we fail?" Elon's smile was soft, almost reassuring. "Then we learn. That's how we've always done it." Meanwhile, across town, Alex was dealing with his own concerns. The quantum energy machine had drawn significant interest, too much, in fact. Late into the night, he stared at his email inbox, now flooded with offers from energy companies, government agencies, and private investors. Most of them seemed promising, even exciting. But as he sifted through the emails, one caught his eye. It was from a large energy conglomerate, the kind of corporation that had been known for resisting clean energy technologies in the past. The email offered a lucrative partnership, a deal that would allow Alex to scale up his quantum system in ways he had never imagined. The numbers were astronomical. It was the kind of opportunity that could set him up for life. But Alex hesitated. He remembered what Mia had said about the risks of getting too entangled with corporate interests. Was he ready to be bought? Was this the right path for the technology he had worked so hard to develop? The email made it clear. They wanted exclusivity, control over the intellectual property, and the ability to dictate the direction of the project. Alex could already hear the warning bells ringing in his mind. Is this what I really want? Alex muttered to himself, staring at the screen. Am I willing to let them take over my vision for the sake of profit? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Kai, who had been living in the lab as well, working on his own projects. Hey man, Kai said, walking in and grabbing a seat. You look like you're wrestling with something. Alex closed the laptop with a sigh. I just got an offer, an incredibly tempting one, but I'm not sure if it's the right choice. It's a big company, they want to partner with me on the quantum machine, but they want to control everything. I don't know if that's what I want for my work. Kai raised an eyebrow. That's a tough one. But let me ask you this. What's your endgame? Is it to make a ton of money? Or is it to change the world? Alex leaned back in his chair, considering. I want to change the world, Kai. But I can't do that if I lose control over what I'm building. What if they take my idea and bury it to protect their old systems? What if I sell out? Kai nodded slowly. It's easy to get caught up in the dollars and the hype. But at the end of the day, we all have to ask ourselves the same question. Are we in this to create something meaningful or just to cash in on an opportunity? Meanwhile, Kai was also grappling with his own decisions. His kinetic energy prototype had shown immense potential, but after the presentation, the interest in his technology had exploded. Investors were clamoring to get their hands on it, but there was one particular organization that had caught his attention, the Global Energy Initiative. They were offering an ambitious partnership to help him scale up the technology, bringing it to communities around the world. But the deal wasn't simple. They wanted access to the intellectual property and the rights to distribute the technology in certain regions. The terms were favorable, but Kai couldn't help but feel uneasy. Was he about to make the same mistakes the corporate world had made in the past, hoarding resources and controlling access to sustainable energy? As he sat alone in his lab late that night, he thought back to the early days of his project, when it had just been a vision, something he built with his hands and his heart. Would he be willing to give that up? Would he allow someone else to decide who got access to the power his technology could create? It's not just about money, Kai murmured to himself. It's about who gets to decide the future. I can't just hand that over. As the Prodigies faced their internal battles, the world continued to watch. News outlets were publishing daily updates, investors were circling, and governments were already discussing policies for integrating their technologies. The Prodigies were being lauded as the future of innovation, but the future wasn't just about technology. It was about the choices they would make in the coming weeks and how those choices would shape the world. Mia, Alex, and Kai had come so far, but now they faced the hardest challenge of all, the challenge of staying true to their vision, even as the world tried to pull them in different directions. The clock was ticking. The next move they made would determine everything. Would they remain loyal to their ideals, or would they allow the pressure of success to change their path? The Prodigies didn't have all the answers, but they knew one thing for sure. The decisions they made now would define not just their futures, but the future of humanity itself. And in the quiet of their labs, as they faced the weight of the world, they knew that the hardest part of their journey was just beginning. The weeks following the groundbreaking presentation felt like an emotional roller coaster for the Prodigies. Every time they thought they had gained some sense of stability, something new, some new deal, new opportunity, or new criticism, came rushing at them. Their lives were no longer just their own. They had become global phenomena, with all the pressure and consequences that came with it. Mia couldn't sleep. She was lying in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, all she could see was the massive potential of her AI. The possibilities were endless, optimizing everything from healthcare to climate change, personalizing education, enhancing creativity. She could feel it deep in her bones. She had built something that could change the world, but the weight of that responsibility was suffocating. On the other hand, she was receiving overwhelming offers. There was one from a major pharmaceutical company offering to fund further development of her AI for medical applications, real-time disease prediction, automated diagnosis, and more. It was an exciting opportunity. The AI could save lives. But there was something about the offer that made her uneasy. The fine print mentioned potential data-sharing agreements with other industry players, which meant her AI could be used in ways she never intended. It could be sold to military contractors, used to monitor populations, or even worse, manipulated to serve corporate interests. She thought back to the conversation she had with Elon a few weeks ago. We need oversight, governance, but we can't let fear stop us. Could she trust herself to make the right call? Was she in danger of letting greed and fear cloud her judgment? Her phone buzzed on the bedside table. It was another email from Dr. Lawrence Spencer, the AI ethicist who had raised concerns about her project. This time, his tone was urgent. Mia, I know you've received numerous offers, but please think carefully about your next steps. The AI you've developed has the potential to be both a blessing and a curse. Be sure you're not selling your soul in the process. The words lingered in her mind, gnawing at her. She had to make a decision, but it felt like the stakes kept getting higher with every passing hour. Meanwhile, across the city, Alex was meeting with his own internal conflict. After receiving the offer from the energy conglomerate, he had been pacing back and forth in his apartment, unable to think clearly. He had always wanted to change the energy sector, create a sustainable and limitless power source. But this offer was so tempting. The money alone would secure his future, fund the development of the quantum energy machine, and potentially bring it to market faster than he could have ever imagined. But at what cost? The conglomerate had outlined a long-term contract that would give them exclusive rights to the technology. They promised to help Alex scale up, but they also made it clear that they would want to control the distribution and determine how the energy was used. It was a deal that could secure the future of his invention, but at the expense of its idealistic vision. He had been warned about these kinds of deals, how easy it was to lose sight of your values when the money and influence started pouring in. He poured himself another cup of coffee and stared at the email. His finger hovered over the reply button, ready to agree to the terms. But there was a nagging voice in the back of his head. Was this the right choice? What would Mia and Kai say if they knew he'd taken the deal? Could he really risk compromising everything he believed in just to make a quick profit? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Kai. Hey man, Kai said, his voice casual but knowing. I see you've been busy. Alex chuckled bitterly. Yeah, you could say that. Got a big offer on the table from that energy giant I was telling you about. They want to partner up, but it feels wrong. The terms, I could sell out and make millions, or I could keep pushing forward and risk being stuck in limbo. Kai was silent for a moment. I get it. This kind of decision isn't easy. But think about it, Alex. What's your end goal? Are you in this to change the world, or just to cash in? Because once you sell out, there's no going back. Alex let out a sigh. I know, but what if I don't have a choice? What if I can't get the funding I need without giving up control? Kai laughed softly. Well, here's the thing, man. No one ever told you it was going to be easy. But just because someone hands you a bag of cash doesn't mean you have to take it. If you've got a real vision, you'll find a way to make it work. Trust me. Alex wasn't sure if he believed Kai, but he appreciated his words. It wasn't the first time Kai had given him a wake-up call, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Kai had always been the one with the unflinching conviction. Maybe Alex needed to remember that. Across the street from Alex's apartment, Kai was facing his own crossroads. His kinetic energy technology had captured the attention of several organizations, but the Global Energy Initiative's offer was the one that had intrigued him the most. They were a progressive, forward-thinking nonprofit focused on renewable energy, promising to help scale his project to underserved areas in Africa, Southeast Asia, and remote regions of South America. But the more Kai thought about it, the more he began to question their motives. The Global Energy Initiative had a reputation for being transparent, but the paperwork he had received was full of vague terms and ambiguous clauses. Was their commitment to sustainability genuine? Or was it just another corporation trying to control the future of energy for their own gain? He was staring at the contract when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Mia. Kai, I know you've been weighing offers, but I just got one that's making me question everything. The AI could revolutionize healthcare, but the price might be my soul. What do you think? Kai stared at the message for a long time, the weight of the question sinking in. What if we're all being played? He thought. What if all these organizations see our innovations as nothing more than products to be exploited? He typed a quick response to Mia. You know the answer already. We have to stay true to what we believe in. The world's not ready for us to let go of the reins. As soon as he hit send, he felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. What if his idealism was clouding his judgment? Was he just as susceptible to the allure of corporate money and influence as Alex and Mia? Would the world be better off if they kept their innovations out of the hands of big corporations? Or would the reality of getting them to the masses require them to make uncomfortable compromises? The phone buzzed again. It was another email from the Global Energy Initiative. Dear Kai, we understand the importance of your work and the need for careful consideration. However, we would like to remind you that partnerships like ours have the potential to reach billions of people in need. Your technology could provide power to the most remote corners of the world, lifting communities out of poverty. Please consider how much good you could do, and let's discuss further at your earliest convenience. Kai closed his eyes. The words sounded so convincing, so noble. But were they really as altruistic as they seemed? The tension was mounting. The Prodigies knew their decisions would shape the future, not just their own, but that of the entire world. But as each day passed, it was becoming harder and harder to stay true to their ideals. Each offer, each contract, each deal felt like a delicate balance between vision and compromise. Would they stay the course, no matter the personal cost? Or would the temptation of fame, fortune, and power ultimately win out? The answers were unclear. The only thing they knew for sure was that whatever choice they made would define their legacy. The weight of their decisions was becoming unbearable. Mia, Alex, and Kai found themselves trapped in a paradox. They had built something extraordinary, something that could change the world. Yet the more they considered their next steps, the more the world seemed to close in on them. The offers, the deals, the expectations from every corner of society. It was all beginning to feel like too much. But it wasn't just the external pressure that was suffocating. It was the growing uncertainty within their own group. Trust, the very foundation of their partnership, was beginning to fray. Mia had been avoiding the others for days. She'd become consumed with the ethical dilemmas surrounding her AI and the potential consequences of moving forward. The endless praise for her work didn't help. Every accolade only made the burden heavier. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, what she was doing, or what she was willing to sacrifice for the sake of progress. The decision from the pharmaceutical company was still hanging over her head. It would take her AI into areas of medicine that could save countless lives. But it would also mean she had to relinquish some control, possibly even compromising her ethical standards for the sake of money and power. It wasn't the kind of world she wanted to create, but the offer was so lucrative, so persuasive. What if they really could use her technology to eliminate disease, eradicate hunger, and fight climate change? Could one bad deal truly outweigh the greater good? Her phone rang, breaking her thoughts. It was Alex. Hey, Mia, he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. We need to talk. Something's going on, and I think it's time we all met up. Mia hesitated. Alex, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to lead this anymore. What? Mia, what are you talking about? We're in this together, Alex replied, confusion creeping into his voice. We all have doubts, but we can't back out now. Not after everything we've built. But Mia wasn't so sure anymore. Could she really trust herself? Could she trust anyone? Meanwhile, Alex had his own concerns. The more he thought about the deal with the energy conglomerate, the more it felt like he was on the verge of selling his soul. He had always wanted to bring energy to those who needed it the most. But this company, this deal, could make him forget everything he'd worked for. A knock at the door broke his train of thought. It was Kai. You look like you've seen a ghost, Kai said, eyeing Alex's tense posture. What's going on? Alex didn't speak at first. Instead, he held up his phone and showed Kai the latest email from the conglomerate. They've added more incentives, more promises. They say they want to help change the world, but the fine print keeps getting worse. I'm losing control over everything I've worked for, and I'm not sure I can go through with it. Kai took the phone and skimmed the email. His brow furrowed. This is bad, Alex. You know they'll bury your technology if it threatens their profits. It's not about energy for the people, it's about energy for them. Alex nodded, but he didn't feel any better. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm making the wrong choice here? What if I'm being too idealistic? Kai exhaled sharply. Idealism isn't a curse, Alex. If you give up on your values now, what do you have left? Alex looked at Kai, searching for something, anything, that would reassure him. But Kai didn't offer comforting words. Instead, he said, you have to ask yourself, what's more important, making money or making a difference? It was a question Alex didn't have the answer to. Across town, Mia was beginning to question everything, including her partnership with Alex and Kai. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were all drifting apart. They had always been in sync, but now it felt like they were each fighting their own battles. Was it possible that the pressure of success was beginning to tear them apart? Mia's phone buzzed again. It was from an anonymous source. She hesitated before opening it, but the subject line caught her attention. Elon Musk's secret deal with the government. Her stomach sank as she opened the email. It was filled with rumors, accusations. Some were exaggerated, others too close to the truth. The email claimed that Elon was secretly working with government agencies to deploy his technology in ways that could monitor and control populations. It implied that his interests were no longer aligned with the future of humanity, but rather with maintaining his power. Mia's hands trembled as she read through the message. Could Elon really be part of something like this? She had trusted him, believed in his vision, but now she wasn't sure who or what to trust anymore. Later that evening, the three of them met in the lab. The mood was tense. The usual energy between them had dulled, replaced with an undercurrent of suspicion. No one spoke at first. They just sat around the table, the weight of their decisions hanging heavily in the air. Mia was the first to break the silence. I think we need to talk. About everything? Alex raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Mia met his gaze, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know if we can trust each other anymore. What do you mean? Kai asked, his tone sharp. Mia shook her head, frustration building. I've been thinking. The offers we've received, those deals, they're starting to feel like traps. And the more I think about it, the more I feel like we're losing control. Like we're pawns in a much bigger game. Alex looked away, his jaw clenched. You think we've been manipulated? Mia nodded slowly. I don't know who to trust anymore. Not even Elon. I've seen some things, rumors, leaks. What if we're not building a better world? What if we're just handing over the keys to the kingdom to people who want to control everything? Kai's face hardened. Mia, are you suggesting we walk away from all of this? After everything we've worked for? Mia paused, her mind racing. She had thought about it. Maybe they were too far gone. Maybe they had already lost themselves. I don't know, Kai, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Maybe it's time we stopped. Maybe it's time we stop letting the world use us for their own agendas. Alex slammed his fist on the table. We can't just quit. We've come too far. We've built something that can change everything. Don't you see that? All of this is bigger than us. Mia's voice was steady, but her eyes were filled with uncertainty. But at what cost, Alex? How many people have we hurt along the way without even realizing it? What if we're no better than the very corporations we're trying to fight? Kai stood up, pacing the room. We can't just abandon it all. Not after everything we've done. We have to make it work. We have to find a way. The tension between them was palpable. Each of them was pulling in different directions, trying to hold on to their beliefs, trying to hold on to something that felt real, something that hadn't been tainted by the world's demands. But the cracks in their trust were clear. It wasn't just the world outside threatening to tear them apart. It was themselves. As the night stretched on, the Prodigies realized something. The path they had been walking, the path to innovation, to greatness, to world-changing technologies, wasn't just about the technology. It was about trust. And right now, that trust was hanging by a thread. If they couldn't trust each other, how could they possibly change the world? The tension in the air was suffocating, thicker than the silence that had fallen over the lab. Mia, Alex, and Kai sat in a triangle around the table, their once unbreakable bond now cracked and splintered. They were no longer on the same path. Each of them was wrestling with different versions of the future. Ones where success, fame, and even their moral compasses were on the line. Mia broke the silence first. Her voice was almost a whisper, raw with emotion. "I think we're past the point of no return." Alex's eyes darkened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Mia said, her voice steadier now, "that maybe we've been so focused on the bigger picture that we've lost sight of ourselves. Maybe we've been too willing to sell out in order to get the kind of power we think we need to change the world." Kai ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Selling out? That's not what we're doing. We're trying to change the world. If we don't take these offers, someone else will. It's not about selling out, Mia. It's about pushing forward, no matter what." "But at what cost, Kai?" Mia retorted. "What if we're the ones being manipulated? What if, by taking these offers, we're just reinforcing the very systems we've been trying to disrupt?" Alex's patience snapped. "We can't go back now. We've built too much, sacrificed too much. And you want to throw it all away because of a few ethical dilemmas?" Mia recoiled. "I never said I wanted to throw everything away. I'm just trying to figure out where we went wrong. How did we end up here, questioning everything we stand for? I can't keep doing this if I don't believe in it anymore." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The trust that had once bound them, three idealists driven by a single, unified goal, was now fragmented. They were on the brink of collapse. Later that night, after the confrontation, Mia found herself standing alone by the window, looking out over the city. The glowing lights below seemed so far removed from the internal chaos she was feeling. The stars above were barely visible through the haze of the city. It was as if everything was clouded, just like her thoughts. She was alone. The email from the anonymous source about Elon's secret deal still weighed heavily on her mind. She tried to push it aside, to focus on the good their team was doing, but now the lines were blurred. What if Elon had known all along that the only way to succeed was to compromise? What if their success had always been part of a much larger, darker game? Mia closed her eyes and tried to center herself. She thought back to the first time they had presented their ideas together, full of hope and optimism. They were going to change the world, and nothing was going to stop them. But now, all she could see were cracks in that vision. The promises of power, wealth, and success had begun to cloud their true purpose. And she realized with a jolt, she had to make a choice. She couldn't keep waiting for the others to figure it out. She had to decide whether she was willing to stay and fight for what she believed in, or whether it was time to walk away. Meanwhile, Alex had retreated to his private office. The walls of the room were covered with blueprints, quantum equations, and notes detailing his energy research. His eyes scanned the piles of work that had consumed him for years. The energy that had once flowed through him, pushing him forward, propelling him to create something that could revolutionize the world, now felt like a distant memory. The offers were too much. The stakes were too high. And every time he thought about the deal with the energy conglomerate, something inside him twisted. He couldn't let go of his dream. But what if this was the only way to bring his invention to the masses? The only way to change the world? He stood and paced the room, unable to shake the feeling that he was losing himself in the process. He was constantly on the edge of a breakthrough, but every moment felt like a battle. The world wanted answers now, and he felt like he was about to be consumed by the very forces he had tried to avoid. Alex pulled up his emails again, but this time he didn't look at the contracts. He looked at the news headlines. Elon Musk's latest secret deal with government revealed. He clicked on the article, and what he read confirmed his worst fears. The article was speculative, but it echoed the concerns he'd had for months. Elon's latest moves were all about consolidating power. The government, the corporations, everyone wanted a piece of the future. Is that what I'm becoming part of? Alex thought to himself, his heart pounding. He didn't want to be another pawn in a game he couldn't control. Kai, too, was struggling with the gravity of the situation. His energy technology had the potential to change lives, to bring power to millions who had never had access to electricity. but the strings that were attached to every offer felt like shackles. The more he thought about the global energy initiative, the more it seemed like a thinly veiled attempt to control the distribution of energy. If he sold his technology to them, he would be giving away control. His vision would be lost. Kai had always prided himself on his independence. He'd built this from the ground up, without relying on anyone's help. He wasn't going to let some nonprofit masquerading as a progressive organization dictate the future of his work. But the pressure from the board, from investors, was immense. He could already see the headlines. Kinetic energy breakthrough promises green power for all. The world would celebrate him as a hero. But the cost, could he live with that? At the same time, a voice in his head kept asking, what if the best chance for change lies within the system? What if working with these organizations could give me the leverage I need to make real, lasting change? But every time he came close to signing the deal, a doubt crept in. He had seen too many people in positions of power get corrupted by greed. The system was designed to keep people like him in check, to funnel their innovations into existing power structures. It was a dangerous game. Kai made a decision. He had to find another way. But could he convince Mia and Alex to walk away from the opportunities that seemed like the only way forward? The next morning, the three of them came together again. But this time it was different. The cold distance between them was palpable. They had no choice but to confront what had been building for days. Their fractured alliance was now laid bare. Alex spoke first, his voice quieter than usual. Mia, I don't know what's going on with you. But this isn't just about our ethics. It's about our future. If we don't act, we lose everything. We lose our shot at changing the world. Mia met his eyes, her own gaze hard. And what if that shot is a lie, Alex? What if we're not the ones in control anymore? Kai finally spoke up, his voice firm, almost angry. We can't go back. We have to decide. Either we make these deals, we take the power, or we walk away from everything. But we can't sit here forever wondering what could have been. Mia felt her heart sink. This was the moment. The one where everything they had built together was about to come crashing down. She looked at Alex, and then Kai. She thought of the months they had spent together. Nights spent brainstorming, coding, dreaming about the future. But now those dreams felt like shadows, slipping away as they fought to hold on to them. Maybe, she said softly, maybe it's time we let go of the dream. Maybe we need to start over, find a new way. But she could see the look in their eyes. There was no turning back. The battle for their vision had begun. But this time, it wasn't just against the world. It was against each other. And in the end, they would have to decide which path they were willing to walk, and who they were willing to betray along the way. The room was thick with tension. Each of the prodigies lost in their own thoughts. Their once inseparable trio now felt more like a fractured, unrecognizable version of its former self. It was clear. The path forward, if there was any, would not be easy. The dreams they had once shared now seemed like distant memories, fading in the harsh light of their new reality. Mia stared at the table before her. She had never imagined this would be the outcome. When they first set out, they had been driven by the idea of changing the world. But now, with the offers from corporations and governments on the table, she wasn't sure they were changing anything. They might just be replacing one form of control with another. The question gnawed at her. Was their success worth losing themselves? Across the room, Alex paced restlessly, his mind running in overdrive. If we take the deal, he thought, we can revolutionize the world. But what if we're just another cog in the machine? The conflicting emotions tore at him. The energy system he'd created could end the world's reliance on fossil fuels, but only if we're willing to sell our souls. Every day, the weight of the decision grew heavier. And then there was Kai, the one who had been the most vocal in pushing for action. His mind was in turmoil as well. He had always believed that changing the system from the inside was the only way to achieve real power. But am I just trying to convince myself? He thought, am I justifying the deal because it's easier than facing the fact that we've already lost control? The confrontation came like a tidal wave. The team had gathered in the lab late that night, each of them unwilling to sleep, unwilling to let the tension stretch into another day. They needed to make a choice. Mia, Alex began, his voice tight, I get it. You're worried about the morality of it all, but we can't sit around and second-guess ourselves anymore. We've worked too damn hard. Mia's jaw tightened. And that's exactly why we're here, Alex. Because we've worked so hard that we're blind to what we're really becoming. You said it yourself. We're changing the world, but at what cost? Kai stood at the window, looking out into the night. He could hear the low hum of the city below, a constant reminder of the vast machine they were trying to disrupt. We all know what's at stake, he said finally, his voice low. We can sit here and argue about the right thing to do, or we can make a decision and move forward. We have a choice, but it won't be easy. But if we wait too long, Mia countered, we'll have lost all our options. We'll be just like the people we're trying to fight. Alex turned to her, frustration leaking into his voice. Then what? Walk away? After everything we've built? After all the lives we've already touched? We're so close to breaking through, Mia. Don't let fear of losing control stop us now. Mia's heart raced. She had always prided herself on being practical, on thinking ahead. But now, every thought felt muddled. Could they really change the world this way? Could they become the very thing they hated? Hours passed, and they argued, and they deliberated. But no conclusion was reached. Finally, in a moment of deep exhaustion, Alex stood up, his hands clenched into fists. We're done talking. His voice was final. We can't keep pretending we can fix everything by just thinking about it. We've built something no one else has. We've come too far. I'm signing the deal. Kai looked at him, eyes wide with disbelief. What? You're just going to throw away everything we've talked about? Everything we've argued over? Not throw it away, Alex snapped. But if we don't take this step, we'll be stuck in the same place forever. And I'm not willing to sit here in limbo any longer. Mia stood, shaking her head. Alex, this is a dangerous game you're playing. I know you want to change the world, but this isn't how we do it. This isn't the future we imagined. But Alex's resolve was unwavering. I've made up my mind. If you want to back out, Mia, if you don't think we should move forward, then do it. But I'm not stopping. The next morning, the air felt heavier than ever. The team had fractured. Mia had left the lab, needing space to think, to breathe. She found herself walking through the quiet streets of the city, hoping for clarity. But nothing came. Only doubt. She had tried to justify their path. She had told herself that maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe they could turn things around. Maybe they could still use their success to bring about the change they had dreamed of. But deep down, Mia knew that the power they had now was like a wildfire, unstoppable once ignited. They could try to steer it, but there was no way to control where it would end. The choice had never been so clear. Do they go back to their roots? Or do they push forward, knowing they might lose themselves in the process? By the time Mia returned to the lab, the decision had been made. Alex had already signed the deal with the energy conglomerate. The papers lay on the desk in front of him, the ink still fresh. Kai didn't speak. He simply watched as Mia entered the room. There was a coldness between them now, an unspoken distance that neither of them had anticipated. Mia stood there for a long moment, staring at the signed contract. It felt like a betrayal. But it wasn't just a betrayal of their mission. It was a betrayal of themselves. This is it then, she said quietly. This is the world we've chosen. Alex looked up at her, his face pale but resolute. I did what I had to do. We did what we had to do. Mia shook her head. We did it. But I don't know if I can be part of it anymore. For the first time in months, the weight of the decision seemed to fall fully on her. She had no answers, no solutions, just a feeling that the dream she had once fought for was now slipping through her fingers. Maybe you don't have to be part of it, Alex said, his voice quieter now, as if he too had come to terms with the cost of his decision. But it's too late to go back. Mia took one last look at the team, their dreams, their work, their future, and walked away, knowing that everything had changed. But she also knew one thing for certain. The hardest part of this wasn't the deal. It was losing what had brought them all together in the first place. As Mia stepped into the unknown, she wondered what the future would hold. But she couldn't help feeling that the battle was far from over. She wasn't sure where she'd go, or what she'd do, but one thing was clear. She was no longer fighting for the same cause. The future would be theirs, but only if they could survive the consequences of the choices they had made. Mia didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. Her steps felt heavy as she walked through the crowded streets, the noise of the city washing over her, but it didn't comfort her. The faces around her seemed distant, their lives moving forward as if nothing had changed. But she knew that she was living in a world where everything had shifted. She had chosen to walk away, but that decision had cost her more than she had anticipated. She hadn't just left the lab or the project. She had left her friends, her dreams, her purpose. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, but it felt like the only way to preserve what little she had left of herself. The decision to leave had come with a sharp clarity. The deal Alex had signed, it wasn't just about power, influence, or technology. It was about control. And for Mia, that wasn't something she could support. Back at the lab, the news of Mia's departure hit like a shockwave. The empty chair at the table felt like a physical reminder of the fracture that had taken place. Alex sat silently, staring at the signed contract, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He had won the battle, but at what cost? Kai had never expected Mia to leave. He had expected arguments, perhaps even a few days of cold silence, but not this. Not her walking away, as if their shared vision was nothing but a fleeting illusion. "She's really gone," Kai said, his voice almost a whisper. Alex nodded, but his expression was distant, lost. "Yeah, I think we all knew it was coming. Do you think it was the right thing to do?" Kai asked, eyeing the contract that now lay on the table like a symbol of their victory. Alex paused before answering. "It's the only thing we could do. We've fought for this for so long. We couldn't just throw it away because of a few doubts." Kai stood up and walked over to the window, watching the city below, the lights twinkling in the dark. "But at what point does the cost of this all outweigh the benefits? We said we were fighting for something bigger than ourselves. But now—" Alex joined him at the window, staring out without seeing. "Now we fight to make it work. We can't go back. We've built too much, invested too much. This is the future. This is what we've been working for." But even as he said the words, they felt hollow, lacking the conviction they once had. Mia spent the next few days in a haze of uncertainty. She had returned to the small apartment she had kept when they first started the project, away from the chaos of the lab. The walls, once filled with motivational quotes and plans for the future, now felt like a cage. She couldn't stop thinking about the decision she had made. It wasn't just about leaving the lab. It was about leaving her friends, the people she had believed in so deeply. But as much as it hurt, she couldn't ignore the nagging sense that they had gone too far. They had strayed from their original mission, and in doing so, they had sold their souls. She knew the energy tech they had developed could change the world, but at what cost? It was the very thing they had promised to fight against. The power to revolutionize energy systems could just as easily become a tool of control. The corporations and governments that now wanted a piece of their work, they weren't interested in changing the world for the better. They were interested in power. But Mia wasn't ready to give up. Not completely. She started reaching out to old contacts, trying to find a way to make things right. It was a long shot, but she needed something, anything, that would allow her to continue her work without selling out. She had made the decision to walk away, but she had to believe that there was another path, one that didn't involve compromising everything they had worked for. Back at the lab, the weight of their success was becoming unbearable. The offers had poured in from every direction. Investors, governments, private corporations, all eager to buy into their technology, to use it for their own purposes. But as the weeks passed, Alex and Kai both started to feel the strain. The excitement of the deal, the potential for massive change, had started to wear thin as they realized the full scope of what they had unleashed. "Do you ever think about what we could have done differently?" Kai asked one evening, his voice more vulnerable than it had been in a long time. Alex didn't respond immediately. He was seated at his desk, going through the endless stream of emails and messages from high-powered executives, all pushing for more funding, more control, more data. "We did what we had to do," Alex said, though his words lacked their usual confidence. "We're changing the world, Kai. Isn't that what we always wanted?" Kai hesitated before answering. "But how much of the world are we really changing? We've got these powerful players breathing down our necks. They don't want to change the world. They want to control it. Alex glanced at him, his brow furrowing. You're still thinking like Mia. This is the future. We have to play by their rules if we want to make a real difference. But at what point do we stop being the ones in control? Kai muttered, his voice tinged with doubt. What happens when we lose ourselves in the process? Mia spent the next few weeks navigating a precarious web of old acquaintances and potential new partners. She reached out to nonprofit organizations, renewable energy startups, and any group that she thought might share her vision. She pitched her ideas, her technology, but with a new focus. One that didn't rely on the corrupt systems of power that had so easily ensnared them. It wasn't easy. Many of the groups she contacted were either too small to make a difference or too tied to larger, more established companies. But Mia's persistence paid off when she got a message from an old friend, someone she had worked with on early renewable energy projects. I think I've got something, the message read. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Bring your tech. We might just have a way forward. For the first time in weeks, Mia felt a flicker of hope. There were still people out there who wanted to change the world. People who believed in the same ideals that she did. It wasn't over yet. She wasn't too far gone. She had just taken a detour. The tension at the lab continued to rise as Alex and Kai worked tirelessly to meet the demands of their new partners. Every day seemed like a battle, each new decision coming with its own moral compromises. They were being pushed into a corner by their own success. It was no longer about their original vision. It was about securing their place in a world that demanded more, faster, and with less concern for the consequences. At the same time, the technology they had developed was too important to let go. It was too powerful, and they knew that if they didn't move quickly, someone else would take it from them and use it for their own gain. They were trapped in a system they couldn't escape. Mia's meeting with her friend was a turning point. They discussed ideas for scaling the technology in a way that would prioritize the needs of underserved communities, ensuring that it was used for the greater good rather than corporate interests. Mia knew this wasn't the easy route, but it was the right one. She had found a new path. As Mia continued to build her new venture, she couldn't help but wonder if Alex and Kai were still questioning their choices. She had tried to warn them, but now it was too late to turn back. The stage was set for a final confrontation. Mia had a vision, a new hope, but would it be enough to undo the damage that had already been done? And what would happen when Alex and Kai realized they had lost her for good? Mia felt the weight of the world as she stood on the rooftop of the building she now called her base of operations. The city sprawled beneath her, a living, breathing entity, its streets filled with people oblivious to the titanic shifts that had taken place in the world of energy, technology, and power. Her path had diverged so far from the one she once shared with Alex and Kai, but despite the clarity of her decision, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had worked for, was on the verge of unraveling. Her meetings with her new partners were promising. They shared her vision for a future where renewable energy was accessible to everyone, not just the elite. Together, they were starting to lay the groundwork for a system that could take her technology to places it had never been before. Underserved communities, third-world nations, remote villages. But in the back of her mind, a constant refrain played over and over again. What if I'm too late? The tech was already out there, in the hands of those who would exploit it for profit. The deal Alex had made wasn't just about money. It was about control. And Mia knew, deep down, that if they kept down that road, they would no longer have a choice. They would become part of the very machine they had once vowed to dismantle. But as much as she wanted to fight, she knew she couldn't do it alone. The pressure was mounting. Every decision she made felt like a high-stakes gamble, but at least now she was fighting on her terms. Back at the lab, the situation was beginning to spiral. Alex and Kai had thought that the deal would bring stability, an influx of funding, resources, and manpower to help them expand their energy tech. They had imagined a future where they could harness this power to make a global impact. But reality had a way of throwing those ideals into stark relief. The offers were coming in faster than ever, each one bigger than the last. Corporations were eager to integrate their technology into existing infrastructures. Governments wanted to control its distribution, and investors were salivating at the thought of unprecedented returns. But every time they took a step forward, they found themselves one step closer to a precipice they hadn't expected. Every conversation with these powerful entities left them feeling more and more like puppets, their strings being pulled by forces far greater than they could control. "We need to make a decision, Alex," Kai said one afternoon, pacing in front of the giant monitors in their lab, his frustration growing by the minute. "We're losing sight of what we started this for. These people don't care about changing the world. They care about profit, power, and control." Alex rubbed his temples, trying to concentrate as the latest report flashed across the screen. "I get it, Kai. I do. But we can't just pull out now. We're too close. Too many people are depending on us." Kai stopped in his tracks and turned to face him. "And what about Mia? Have you thought about her? What about her vision? The one we used to share? She saw what was happening before we did." The mention of Mia's name made Alex's stomach twist. He had told himself 1,000 times that she would come around, that she would see the logic in their decision. But now, with each passing day, he felt the weight of her absence more and more. "She made her choice," Alex said, but his voice lacked the conviction it once had. "She walked away. But we didn't have to push her to that point," Kai shot back. "We should have listened. Now look at us. We're not even sure what we're becoming anymore." Alex turned back to the monitor, staring at the incoming contracts that were pouring in. The numbers were staggering. The potential was endless. But as he read through the terms, he realized that the dream he had held so tightly to was slipping away. "Maybe you're right," Alex admitted quietly, finally acknowledging the unspoken truth. "But it's too late to change course now." Mia's phone buzzed late one evening. It was an encrypted message from one of her old contacts, a journalist who had been investigating the corporate dealings surrounding the energy tech they had created. She opened the message, her heart racing. "The deal with the conglomerate is deeper than you think. They have plans to control the entire global market for energy, locking out smaller players like you. They've even begun talking to governments about exclusive rights to your technology. If you want to stop them, you need to act fast." Mia's blood ran cold. She had always known that the corporations wouldn't play fair, but this was more than she had anticipated. They weren't just interested in using her technology, they were interested in eliminating anyone who could challenge their monopoly. She couldn't sit idly by any longer. The time for hesitation was over. Mia knew she had to act, and she had to do it soon. If she didn't, the dream of a fairer, more equitable energy future would die before it had a chance to even begin. But there was something else she had to consider, something she hadn't allowed herself to think about until now. The people she had once called friends were on the other side of this battle. They had made their choice, and they were playing the game by the rules the corporation set. They had embraced the system, and now it was too late to turn back. Mia wasn't sure if Alex and Kai even understood what they had unleashed. They had thought they could control the technology, but that was never the way it worked. Power always had a way of slipping out of your hands, and when you were trying to change the world would change you. The final confrontation was inevitable. Mia made the decision to confront Alex and Kai one last time. She had to make them see what they were becoming, and she couldn't do it from a distance anymore. She needed to face them directly, even if it meant losing them for good. She called Kai first. He was the one she trusted the most, the one who had always understood the deeper vision they had shared. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Mia." His voice was hoarse, as though he hadn't slept in days. "It's me," she replied, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "We need to talk." They agreed to meet at an old cafe they had frequented during the early days of their project, before the world had known their names, before they had become part of something much bigger than themselves. When Mia arrived, Alex and Kai were already there, sitting at a table by the window. They looked different, older, more worn, as if the weight of the decisions they had made was beginning to take its toll. Mia took a deep breath and sat down across from them. "I don't have much time," she said, her voice quieter than usual, "but we need to talk about what you've done, what we've all done." Alex opened his mouth to speak, but Kai cut him off. "We know what you're going to say. You're going to tell us we sold out, that we've lost sight of what we started this for. But Mia, you have to understand, this isn't about just us anymore. This is bigger than anything we ever imagined." Mia's eyes locked onto Kai's. "Bigger? Or more dangerous?" You're handing over control of everything we built to the very people we wanted to stop. How can you not see that? Because sometimes you have to work within the system to change it, Alex said, his voice edged with frustration. We've always known this was going to be a battle, but we can't fight it if we don't have the resources. We can't change the world if we're not in the room with the people who are shaping it. Mia shook her head, tears welling up. You've already lost. You think you're still in control, but you're not. You're just another cog in their machine. There was a long silence, the weight of their words hanging in the air between them. Finally, Kai spoke. Maybe we have lost control, he said quietly. But it's too late to go back now, Mia. We can't undo what we've done. Mia's heart broke. She had hoped, foolishly, that they would see reason. But the truth was clear. They had already made their choice, and she had made hers. Then I guess this is where we part ways, she said softly, standing up from the table. As Mia walked away, she knew the battle was just beginning. The world was changing, and she would do everything in her power to make sure it changed for the better. But she had learned something crucial. Sometimes, the hardest battles weren't fought against the enemy. They were fought within, and Mia had a new battle to face. The road ahead was long, but it was hers to walk. The days after the confrontation with Alex and Kai felt surreal to Mia. She had hoped for a breakthrough, for some last-minute shift that would allow them to see the bigger picture. But that moment had passed. She had left the cafe feeling like a chapter of her life had closed, and it wasn't just about the technology or the project anymore. It was about everything she had believed in. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about the choice to stand for something greater than yourself, even when it meant sacrificing what you thought you wanted. Mia's heart ached, but she knew she had made the right decision. She couldn't be a part of what Alex and Kai were becoming. She couldn't be part of a system that valued control over compassion. Now, she had to figure out how to move forward. The next few days were a blur of meetings with her new partners, people who had heard the stories, who had believed in the same dream she had once shared with Alex and Kai. The urgency was palpable. Every conversation now felt like a race against time, as she tried to navigate a labyrinth of threats and promises, allies and enemies. One of the first pieces of good news came when an investor who had been interested in her project before reached out. A group of venture capitalists had formed a coalition with the goal of creating a decentralized network that would bypass the corporate giants that were consolidating power. They believed that her technology, in its purest form, could be the key to disrupting the entire energy sector. They didn't have the immense resources the corporations did, but they had something just as powerful, a sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, Mia felt the spark of hope reignite in her chest. But hope was a fragile thing. In this world, it could be extinguished as quickly as it was born, and Mia knew that the path she was walking was fraught with danger. Meanwhile, Alex and Kai had thrown themselves into the new deal with a single-minded intensity. They told themselves it was for the greater good, that the technology was too valuable to let slip into the wrong hands. The corporations, they argued, were simply a means to an end. They would use the power and influence they had gained to force the system to change from within. But as the weeks wore on, the cracks in their rationalization began to widen. Kai's doubts were growing. He had seen firsthand the pressure that the larger players were putting on Alex. The promises of limitless funding and resources had come with an unexpected cost: compromises. Every meeting with a corporate partner, every phone call with government officials, was a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had lost. "We're not making the decisions anymore, Alex," Kai said one evening, his voice weary. "They are. Every contract, every partnership, it's all about them, not us." Alex stared out of the window of their office, the city lights casting long shadows across his face. "We can't afford to back out now. We're too deep in. Too many people are counting on us." Kai didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure anymore if they were still fighting for the right things. The original vision had been to create something that would help the world, something that could change lives. But now, it felt like they were just pawns in someone else's game. "You know what's at stake, right?" Alex continued, his voice more insistent. "We're not just doing this for us. We're doing it for everyone. The future of energy, of the world. It's all in our hands." But Kai wasn't convinced. The weight of Alex's words felt more like a burden than a call to action. They had believed they could control this, believed they could shape the future without being consumed by it. But now, Kai wasn't so sure. Back at Mia's new headquarters, the pressure was mounting in its own way. The venture capitalists who had backed her were eager for results, and while they believed in her vision, they also wanted to see a return on their investment. The stakes were high, and Mia knew that this was a make-or-break moment. The first step was launching a small-scale pilot project in an underserved region, a remote village that had been without reliable access to energy for years. Mia and her team had already begun the groundwork, designing the infrastructure that would use their renewable tech to provide the village with clean, sustainable energy. The project wasn't just a test for her technology, it was a statement. But as she prepared to roll out the plan, Mia received a warning. An anonymous source had contacted her with a message, "They're coming for you. They won't let you take this from them." Mia knew exactly who they referred to. The corporate giants, the ones who had already begun to monopolize the energy market. They weren't going to sit back and let her disrupt their control. In the days that followed, the threat became more real. Mia's team began to notice strange things: security breaches, threats online, and anonymous calls warning them to drop the project. She knew this was just the beginning. The system didn't take kindly to those who threatened its status quo. One evening, as Mia sat in her office reviewing plans, her phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. "Mia," a voice on the other end said. It was a voice she didn't recognize, but the tone was all too familiar, calm, measured, and cold. "You need to stop what you're doing." Mia's pulse quickened. "Who is this?" "You know who I am," the voice replied. "You've made a mistake. You've gone too far. The deal with the conglomerates is already done. There's no turning back." Mia's heart sank. She had been prepared for this, but hearing it out loud was another thing entirely. "I'm not stopping. What we're doing is right. It's what's best for everyone." "You're naive," the voice said, the words laced with condescension. "You don't understand the forces you're up against. You can't win. Not now. Not with what's coming." The line went dead. Mia sat back in her chair, trying to steady her breathing. She had always known that going up against the powers that be would come with its own set of dangers. But this was a warning. They were no longer just opponents. They were adversaries, willing to do whatever it took to win. Meanwhile, the split between Mia and her old colleagues continued to have its own ripple effects. Kai was beginning to question everything. The more he saw of Alex's involvement with the corporate world, the more the lines between right and wrong blurred. Was Mia right? Had they lost their way? The temptation to reach out to her was there, but it wasn't just the technology that had divided them. It was their vision, their ideals. And in a moment of weakness, Kai did something he hadn't thought he would ever do. He reached out to Mia. Mia stared at her phone when the message from Kai came through. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to move forward, to stay focused on her mission. But something in the words caught her attention. "I think we need to talk." She paused, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She had never wanted to walk away from her friends, from her dream. But now, it was different. The world was changing, and she had made her choice. The question was, could they make a choice that would bring them back together? Or was it too late? As the clock ticked toward the moment of truth, Mia knew the final battle was drawing near. The stakes had never been higher. Would she be able to change the world, or had the system already won? And what role would Alex and Kai play in the world they had all dreamed of? She didn't know the answers, but she did know one thing. She wasn't going down without a fight. The days were blending together now for Mia. The relentless barrage of threats, both subtle and overt, was starting to take its toll. It seemed like every step forward she took was met with a new obstacle, new pressures from all sides. The phone calls, the emails, the unmarked cars parked outside her office. Everything pointed to one undeniable truth. She was at war. Her technology, the dream she had nurtured for so long, was more than just a tool. It had become a symbol, a beacon for all those who had dared to believe in a different kind of future. But now, that same technology was also a target, a prize coveted by the very system she had fought to dismantle. The message from Kai still lingered in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that the moment for reconciliation had passed. But there was something else there too, a sliver of hope. Maybe Kai still saw the bigger picture. Maybe there was still a chance to save what they had built together. She picked up the phone, her finger hovering over the screen for a moment. Should she respond? The familiar tone of a text alert broke her out of her trance. It was from one of her top engineers, Sarah. Mia, you need to see this. At the office, Mia stepped into the dimly lit control room, where Sarah and the rest of the tech team were gathered. They all looked up as she entered, their faces tense. What is it? Mia asked, her voice steady despite the rising anxiety in her chest. Sarah pointed to the screen. The image was a satellite map of their pilot project in the remote village, part of the decentralized grid Mia had been working on. It's happening. The corporations are moving faster than we anticipated. They've begun blocking the transmission lines in our area. Mia's heart sank. The corporate giants were already trying to shut her down. Are you sure? Mia asked, stepping closer to the screen. What kind of block are we talking about? We're seeing interference in the grid systems, Sarah replied. Not just sabotage, but systematic interference. They're using their influence over the local governments to prevent us from connecting to the wider energy grid. They're trying to isolate us. Mia clenched her fists. This was exactly what she had feared. The corporations weren't going to allow her to build a viable alternative, not while they controlled the entire system. How long do we have? Mia asked. We don't know, Sarah said, but we're working on countermeasures. We might be able to bypass the block if we can implement a few key changes in the infrastructure. Mia nodded. Do whatever you can, and make it fast. That night, Mia stayed late at the office, her mind racing. The only way to counter the corporate onslaught was to expose them for what they were, monopolists. She needed to take the fight public, broadcast it to the world. But she also needed allies. And that's when she made the decision. She knew what she had to do. She had to meet with Kai. The next evening, under the cover of darkness, Mia arrived at the address Kai had sent her in his message. It was a small, nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. There was no sign of life as she approached, but she knew this was the place. The message had been clear. If you want to talk, come alone. She stepped through the heavy door, which creaked open as she entered. The warehouse was empty, save for the faint hum of computers and the flickering lights that lined the walls. At the far end of the room, Kai stood, his face illuminated by the glow of a monitor. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced with a weariness that made him look years older than the last time she saw him. Mia, he said, turning toward her. You came. I came because we're running out of time, Mia replied, her voice tinged with urgency. They're trying to shut us down. They've already started blocking the grid. You were right. We can't wait any longer. Kai's face hardened, but there was something different in his eyes. Something that hadn't been there the last time they spoke. Regret, perhaps. I knew this was coming, Kai said, his voice quiet. But I didn't know how to stop it. Not from the inside. It's too big now. Mia stepped forward, her gaze intense. Kai, we can still do this. We can still take them down. But we need to expose them. We need to let the world see what they're doing. Kai hesitated for a moment before nodding. You're right. They won't stop unless we force their hand. For the first time in what felt like ages, Mia allowed herself to breathe. This wasn't just about technology anymore. This was about fighting for something that transcended their past disagreements. This is it, Kai, Mia said. We have to act fast. The next few days were a blur of activity as Mia and Kai worked together to coordinate their next move. The plan was bold. They would release the data they had compiled, showing the corporations' interference in the energy grid, their monopolistic behavior, and the ways in which they had colluded with governments to maintain their stranglehold on the energy market. It was a risky move. If they were caught, the consequences would be severe. But if they succeeded, they could expose the corruption at the heart of the global energy industry and change the future forever. But just as the data was ready to go public, the unthinkable happened. It was late one evening when the knock came at the door of Mia's office. She looked up, startled, and immediately recognized the figure standing in the doorway. Alex, she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and frustration. What are you doing here? Alex's face was pale, his eyes wide with concern. Mia, we need to talk. She motioned for him to sit, but her mind was already racing. What could he possibly want? Was this another attempt to convince her to join their side again? "I'm not here to convince you," Alex said, as though reading her thoughts. "I'm here because I know what's coming. I've been in their meetings, Mia. I've seen the plans. If you release that data, they'll make sure you disappear. And not just you. They'll come after everyone you care about." Mia's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" "They'll use their power to silence you. They'll destroy everything you've worked for. I tried to warn you. You don't understand what they're capable of." Mia felt the room close in on her. She had known the risks. She had known the danger. But hearing it from Alex, hearing the fear in his voice, made it all feel too real. "What do you want me to do, Alex?" Mia asked, her voice shaking. "Stay quiet? Let them win?" Alex shook his head. "No, I'm not asking you to stay quiet. I'm asking you to wait. Just a little longer. I've found a way to expose them, but we have to do it carefully. We can't rush into this, Mia. If we do, they'll crush us before we even get started." Mia stared at him, torn between her desire to take immediate action and the fear that Alex might be right. He had always been pragmatic, but had he now become just another cog in the machine? "Why should I trust you?" Mia asked, her voice low and wary. "You're the one who made the deal with them. You're the one who turned your back on everything we believed in." Alex's eyes flickered with regret, but he stood his ground. "I know. I made mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them. I'm offering you a chance to win this, but we need to do it smart. Together." For a long moment, Mia didn't speak. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. Could she trust him again? Could she risk waiting? Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but resolute. "I'll give you one chance, Alex. But if this goes wrong, we do it my way." Alex nodded, a look of relief washing over him. "I'll do whatever it takes." As they walked out of the office together, Mia realized the battle was far from over. They had a plan, but the risks were higher than ever. The final showdown was approaching, and this time, there would be no turning back. The day had arrived. The stakes were higher than ever, and every decision Mia made felt like it was teetering on the edge of a razor-sharp cliff. The countdown to the final showdown was fast approaching, and there was no going back. This wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about everything: truth, freedom, and the future. Mia's fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised to press the button that would release the damning data to the world. The documents were ready. The evidence against the corporate giants, hidden deals, government collusion, and the manipulation of energy resources was all there, neatly compiled. If she released it, there would be no turning back. The world would know the truth, but it would also come with unimaginable consequences. Beside her, Alex and Kai stood, both silent but visibly tense. The room was thick with anticipation. The air itself felt heavy, as if it were charged with the electricity of the moment. "You sure about this?" Alex asked, his voice quieter than usual. His eyes flicked nervously to the screen, and Mia could hear the uncertainty in his tone. Mia nodded, her face hard. "We don't have a choice. This is the only way to stop them." "But what about the people who'll get hurt?" Kai interjected, his voice carrying the weight of his doubt. "You know how they'll retaliate. They'll go after more than just us. Families, communities, this could ruin lives." Mia took a deep breath, meeting Kai's eyes. She knew the risks. She knew what they were all facing. But what was the alternative? Stay silent? Allow the corrupt system to continue strangling the world, just so a few could profit at the expense of everyone else? "I'm not just doing this for us," Mia said, her voice steady. "I'm doing this for all of them, the ones who have been waiting for a chance at something better, the ones who can't fight for themselves. This is for everyone who believes in a future where we don't have to live under their thumb anymore." Alex and Kai exchanged a glance, but neither of them spoke. The tension in the room was unbearable. Mia turned back to the screen. With a single click, everything would change. "It's now or never," she thought. Before she could press the button, the door to the room suddenly burst open. In an instant, several armed security personnel stormed in, their presence as abrupt as it was shocking. Mia's heart skipped a beat as her mind scrambled to process what was happening. "Ms. Harris," one of the men said, his voice cold and businesslike. "We can't let you do this." Mia stood up, instinctively backing away from the computer, her thoughts racing. "How did they find us so quickly?" "We've been monitoring your activities for a while," the man continued, his tone now more menacing. "You've gone too far. You're putting too many lives at risk." Alex's face turned pale. He stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "We're not trying to destroy anything. We're trying to change the system, make it better for everyone." The lead security officer scoffed, his eyes hard. "You think you're going to change anything? You think you can just release that data and the world will suddenly thank you? There's a reason we've controlled this industry for so long, and it's not because of mistakes." Mia felt a surge of anger flood her chest. "You don't control the future. You only control what people let you control." She could feel the danger closing in, but she wasn't going to back down. "I'm not afraid of you." "Maybe not," the officer said, his voice now taking on a darker edge. "But you should be afraid of what happens if you keep pushing this. We'll make sure you're buried so deep, nobody will even remember your name." The threat hung in the air like a shadow, and for a moment, Mia wondered if she could even survive this. But then she thought of all the people who had trusted her. She thought of the village that was counting on her technology. She thought of the future they all deserved. Without warning, Mia turned toward Kai and Alex. "Get out of here. I'll hold them off." "What are you talking about?" Alex said, his eyes wide. "Mia, no, we can't just—" "You don't have time to argue," Mia interrupted, her voice hard. "They're going to try to stop me, and I'm not letting them. Get the data out. Do it now. I'll keep them busy." Before either of them could protest, Mia hit a button under the desk, activating a hidden backup system that began uploading the data to multiple secure servers around the world. It was a decoy to throw the security team off the scent. As they rushed toward the desk, Mia stood her ground, blocking their path. "You don't have to do this," the officer said, his voice strained. "We can still make a deal. You don't have to ruin everything." Mia shook her head, a bitter smile forming on her lips. "The deal was made a long time ago, and you've already broken it." Meanwhile, Kai and Alex had rushed to the alternate exit Mia had pointed out to them. They didn't know what would happen to her, but they knew that if they didn't act fast, all of their efforts would be for nothing. The data was being spread, but it needed to be pushed out to the media, fast. The world needed to know the truth. As they raced through the corridors of the building, they could hear the commotion from the room where Mia was confronting the security team. The air was thick with tension, and neither of them spoke, both understanding that there was nothing left to do but push forward. Finally, they reached the van that was waiting outside, driven by one of their trusted allies. Kai and Alex both piled in, and the driver sped off, heading straight for the nearest broadcasting station. The plan was simple: get the data into the hands of the journalists and let them tell the world. As they drove, Alex turned to Kai, his face conflicted. "Do you think she'll make it?" Kai's jaw clenched, his mind racing. "I don't know, but we can't waste this chance. We have to make sure the truth gets out." Back in the building, Mia was doing everything she could to delay the security team. She fought with all the strength she had, ducking under their grasp and sprinting toward the control room where she had one last trick up her sleeve. Her heart pounded, but she didn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close. She reached the room just as the team closed in on her. With one final, desperate move, she activated the emergency broadcast system, sending the data directly to every major news outlet. Within seconds, it was live. Across the globe, the truth about the corporate conspiracy was out in the open. The data spread like wildfire. The world was watching. As the final seconds ticked down, Mia heard the sound of sirens in the distance. She knew they were coming for her, but it didn't matter anymore. She had done what she set out to do. She had exposed them. The corporations no longer controlled the narrative. The people would fight for the truth. And that, Mia knew, was the first step toward a new world. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?